Good morning, sir. Please, can you hear me? Good morning. Please, can you hear me? Blessing.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Debo, Debo,
Yes.
are you the only one here?
Check now. We are three.
Okay.
Well,
The moderator is here already.
There is nothing like achieving this world.
Unmute Sunday James to start. I can't unmute him from my end.
Hello?
We are with you, sir.
Hello?
We are with you, sir.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, sir.
I remember that I have to take my food and decided that let's just one more time.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. You can speak, sir. You can go ahead, sir.
Yeah, yes, how are you?
Fine, sir.
Hello?
We can hear you, sir. You can speak.
Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes, how are you?
Fine, sir. You can start now. You are live,
Yes.
sir. Okay.
Okay, good morning to everyone connected to this program this morning. A conceptual program of the Peace Building and Development Consult, which was concepted for Independence Day celebration, Nigeria at 65. We are all aware that Nigeria's independence of 1960 was born out of hope, resilience, and shared aspiration for self-determination. And this is the reason why all of us that are hooked up to this meeting should appreciate the management of Peace Building and Development Consult for being conscious of this very, very germane and important landmark meeting in the history of Nigeria's independence at 65. We are all aware that the country has made remarkable strides and giant impact in governance, culture, technology, and global influence. Yet, we have challenges of insecurity, ethnic and religious divisions, inequality, and government gaps that has continued to test the fabric of unity and peace of our country. Today, we are celebrating Nigeria at 65. By implication, every other person that was born in 1960 must have clocked 65 years or about to clock 65 years. And that is to tell you the wealth of experience that such individuals will have garnered. Every person that is connected or will be connected to this platform for this meeting should please contribute immensely from the wealth of experience, professionalism, and expertise that they have gathered. And for those who have clocked 65, we're expecting more from them. And the same thing, the young generation, we're also expecting more from them because everybody has his own level of understanding, experience, and expertise. And this meeting, by objective, is to provide a platform for inclusive dialogue among very key stakeholders on national unity and development, is to reflect on Nigeria's progress, challenges, and lessons since independence, and to inspire citizens of Nigeria to be committed to peace building as a personal and collective responsibility. So having said this, if Dr. Kayode is around, I think he can hook up and speak on.
Yes, good morning, everyone. And it's a delight to have you join us this morning. Thank you, ACG Sunday James, for moderating this session. I'm glad Professor Freedom is able to join us. I can see you. He's having some challenges with his phone, so and also the first speaker, Professor Ope, is also having some challenges. So I'm thinking if we could just share a bit before both of them are able to join us on where we are at Nigeria. I think I'll leave the moderation for you, ACG Sunday, until the speakers are able to join us. The technical team are working. I think they may be having network problem, but we'll see what we can do in the next 5 minutes for them to join us. Thank you again for joining us. Over to you, ACG.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kayode. So having come this far, while we're still expecting our resource persons to speak, and when they are connected, every one of us will be hooked up to be able to hear them. We have these thematic areas of discourse. One is historicizing Nigeria's journey since independence, the burden of ethno-religious conflicts on nation building. We shall be focusing on how ethnic rivalries, religious intolerance, and identity politics have shaped national unity and development. And we shall also be speaking on federalism and politics of resource control, the Nigerian dilemma. We shall be focusing on balancing centralization and regional autonomy in resource allocation and governance. We shall also be talking about the resource costs, whether it's a blessing or a curse, the oil wealth, other natural resources, corruption, and underdevelopment. We shall be focusing on the overdependence on crude oil and how it has fueled economic volatility, corruption, and unhindered diversification. We shall also be talking about security and fragility, the rise of insurgency, banditry, and militancy in post-independence Nigeria. And our focus shall be on the root causes of insecurity and how it has threatened national stability, economic growth, and social cohesion. We shall also be talking about inclusive governance and democracy in transition, talking about electoral malpractices, political violence, and governance challenges in Nigeria. And our focus shall be on women and youth representation in governance and how flawed elections and weak institutions undermine democratic consolidation. We shall also be discussing the debt trap and economic mismanagement, Nigeria's struggle with sustainable development since independence. And our focus shall be on how corruption, mismanagement, and debt servicing have impeded economic progress. And lastly, we shall be talking about education, youth unemployment, and the challenge of human capital development in Nigeria. And we shall be focusing on brain drain and how weak education systems and limited employment opportunities affect nation building and productivity. I'm happy that we are starting in good time because the time is 10 hours West African time. We have a very good platform that is live streaming already. So everybody connected to this should expect the best from this meeting. And what are the expected outcomes? One, inclusive multi-stakeholder dialogue with real-time citizen participation. So we're expecting inclusive multi-stakeholders dialogue with real-time citizen participation. So everybody participating must be very, very apt. And then we are expecting stronger visibility of peace building development consult as a national thought leader on peace and development. We're also expecting action-oriented recommendation that can be documented in post-event communique. And lastly, we're also expecting viral digital engagement through hashtags and symbolic peace pledges. This will come up and you'll be briefed as we continue this program. Thank you. Sharon. Let me close because I'll be needing a from time to time. They brought light. Okay. I want to see everybody. I want to see the participant.
Okay, now, Love ya, Carlo. Listen, magana wannan sabon gidan wasu na sabon gidan nan wasu na son mutum da yau
Sudan.
Suna da house girl, but suna da baɗi aikin zai musu yawa. So suna son assistant shi ne na kiran.
Okay, that's very good. So da ya kyau. Ina sunanki?
Mr. Bagawa, ita bane sa. Abokin.
Sorry. Ai ban lura bai. Kace to ai kace Christian. Ni ba na ka sabo daga wani wuri ne fa. I didn't even look at her Christian. Ya kike? Sanu. So that will be good. Ya kyau sosai. Well done. So she can Christian. You're welcome. Yeah.
Hello, ACG. ACG, sir.
Yeah.
I think Professor Kenife is online, so maybe he can start while we wait for Professor Okwe. And
okay, why not?
So you can please invite him. He's online.
Professor Ken, huh?
Professor Kenife, yes.
Hello. Hello, Professor Ken. Are you online? Are you hearing me? Professor Ken, are you hearing me?
Oh, hello.
Good morning, Prof.
Oh, hi. Good morning. I can hear you.
Yes, please, the floor is yours. The floor is yours. Please, can you continue, please? Everybody is hooked up to you and we're listening.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I wasn't expecting to speak, so but it's fine. It's fine. Now, I was asked to look at the debt trap and the economic mismanagement that comes with it, and how that has impeded progress on achieving sustainable economic development since independence. Well, first of all, our struggle with sustainable development, can also be attributed to a lot of other things. But we know that the most prominent of all of them is the level of mismanagement and the debt level that has been accrued in our economy, and how devastating that has been over time. So, and given that it's only 20 minutes, I have to restrain myself to concise details. Now, when did we actually get into this debt business? It was at the turn of 1990, around that time. That was when our oil boom, the first phase of the oil boom, 1980 something. So that's when the 81, 82, that was when the first phase of oil boom came to an end. And then we had that slump. Then we started scratching our heads for money, and we entered into austerity measures. If you remember when Shagari was saying, fasten your seatbelt, all that stuff. But then it all came to a head when the military administration dragged us into IMF debt. And it was that time that we knew what it tastes like to become, to have to swallow conditionality or IMF conditionalities. Now, that didn't go down very well. And I don't know any country in the world that took IMF loan that has so many good things to say about them in respect to the conditionalities. Now, what were the areas that it started to hit? One was they abolished our marketing board. which is so strategic to the way we have run our business from the regional, the 60s, when the regions were all doing all the agricultural pyramid, granite pyramid, oil was doing well, cocoa was doing well, but the marketing board was that resilient part that was guaranteeing purchase and also access to international markets. They dissolved that, and we have never recovered. Even till today, we haven't recovered from that. But there were some good things though, because they helped us to liberalize our banking sector. So we suddenly had about 93 banks and all of that. But there's a long trajectory for the banks, because in 2005, they recapitalized and went from 2 billion to 25 billion. And right now they are going to 200 and 500 billion respectively. So that is the only cherry good news in all of that. But the rest of it were pain, real pain. We saw how our industrial outputs, for example, you saw the decimation of 2 million jobs in Kano, Kaduna, and Lagos on textile, simply because the thing was thrown open and cheap cotton and cheap products were rushing into the country. That's just it. But the debt situation continued to the head. It came to a head in 2003, 2005. And that was the point where Obasanjo tried to rescue Nigeria from 30 billion debt owed to the Paris Club. We gathered 12 billion and then we got forgiven 18 billion. Now that's 30 billion was the high mark. That was what we had in 2005. But there were things that happened, which is where we are going to, that will be the entry point for mismanagement. Three laws came into effect. One was DMO. The Debt Management Office was created to begin to collect all the debts so that on a monthly basis, publish those so that we know what the state is owing, what the federal is owing, what is the domestic debt, and what is the external debt. It also had the responsibility to prepare this borrowing list and then also submit those to the National Assembly because they have to approve that. But the most consequential law that came is Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. Now, this is the act I'm going to develop the thesis around so that you can see where, if you are talking about mismanagement and you're talking about debt, that is really where you need to visit. And I will give more details of that. Now, but in terms of our debt, you know that we are almost over 100 trillion in debt in naira terms, and in terms of dollar, is hitting nearly $100 billion now. You know that. Now the fact of the matter is that now you're talking about almost $100 billion compared to 30 billion that you had in 2005. So it's about 3 times more. And a huge jump in this debt actually occurred in the last 3 years, a quick jump in those. And if you break it down, you will see that the majority of the debt actually comes from federal government. State governments account for a very small part of those, both domestic and foreign. They account for both. And then you have to understand why. Debt is in the exclusive legislative list. So it is really federal government that is the big player when it comes to debt. So all other levels of government, state government, federal government, they all have to take a cue and they have to meet stringent conditions before they could be allowed to take external loan. Because in the end of the day, any external loan taken, the sovereign exposure comes with it. So that's why federal government has to make sure that they look at so many criteria before they allow them. One of those criteria, depending on whether you are going to capital market or bonds or whether you want to simply borrow, one of them is to check whether you have actually domesticated the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. Only 25 states have domesticated that. And we can also come to that detail. So what has happened now is that we have huge debts, and then the servicing of that debt became even a bigger problem. Now, at some point, some 2 years ago, we were over almost 100% debt service to government revenue, which means that literally everything government earns goes to service debt. And then if you do that, where do you get the money to pay for salaries? It means that you're actually borrowing, extra borrowing to pay salaries, extra borrowing to pay for recurrent expenditure, which the law does not allow. We're going to come to that law in a minute. So, but these are the dimensions. And then that puts a lot of pressure on even our fiscal monetary policy, because whatever reserves that you have, a lot of it goes to service the external debt, which is denominated in dollar. And then at one point, we had 60-40, external 60 and domestic 40. The government moved through various policy trusts to rebalance to 40-60, so that the external debt is around about 40 now, and the domestic is about 60. And we'll try to maintain that balance. Now, let's go to, see, looking at the time, let's go to the main kernel. What is it about that law that makes us feel that there is some level of mismanagement and some lost opportunity? The law says, first of all, the fiscal law 2007 governs all fiscal activity, public sector finance management, and then it looks at debt and debt sustainability issues. It also looks at how federal government raises revenue from the state-owned enterprises, and there are a lot of them, almost 500. But a few of them are on the scheduled list, Schedule 2 list, about 100. So those are the ones that government revenue generating ones. Government demands that 80% of the operating surplus must be paid to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. But let's look at the story. The story is this. The law says it's not a bad thing to borrow money. In fact, America is the richest country in the world. America is the most indebted. Global trade is 33 trillion. America owes 34 trillion. And what happens is that American borrowing has become a scandal because America borrows from any country that is successful. It goes to China that is making money. It borrows big trillions from them. It goes to Europe. It borrows 1.5 trillion. It goes to Japan. Borrows, but America is never going to pay their debt. All they will do, they print more dollars, and they will call it quantitative easing. So that is the irony. And so you can understand why the BRICS are heading out, fast. They're heading out fast because they've seen that there are more questions than answers. And you also see why Nigeria and many others have decided to go towards China for not only for currency swap, but also to have some of our reserves in yuan. Because in 2018, the IMF admitted China to the basket of currencies. There used to be 3, but now 4. Now there are 5. And that is Japanese yen, pounds, euro, USD. So they admitted, and the moment they admitted, the many countries now ran to hold some yuan reserves. And then what they followed after that, 5% of our reserves were in yuan. Immediately after that, we went for swap, currency swap, or to reduce our dependence on American dollar, USD. And we have gone for a second round right now, which is about 2 billion. I've asked government to raise that to 10 billion. Now, what does that mean? When we are trying to, 60% of world debt is denominated in dollars, in USD. And then America also has about 25% of world GDP, 84% of world transactions are contracted in dollar. So dollar is is always on a witness stand when you talk about debt and debt sustainability. Now, what does the law say? The law says you can borrow, but you tend to borrow to leverage development because every country borrows. But what the law says is that in our own case, they want you to borrow. There are eligibility criteria for borrowing. One is that you borrow for capital expenditure and human resource development. And when you look at capital expenditure, you can see 2 things there. You see infrastructure, and then the second thing you see investment in productive capacity. In other words, that productive activity that is capable of repaying the money and capable of generating growth. So, I mean, if you're building a refinery or building some people, there are some projects where the government is investing, like buying 2,000 tractors and all of that stuff. Okay, because they will have a multiplier effect on our economy and are capable of repaying. So that's where it says on capital. But it says human resource development. And on human resource development, it's looking at health. It's looking at education, you're looking at employment. Of course, employment also includes self-employment. Those are the only 3 in that area. It doesn't tell you to borrow money to share. There's no such thing as conditional cash transfer in that law. It doesn't tell you to borrow money to pay salaries or any recurrent or expenditure. It's not there. They're not there. The government says, the law actually, even in normal terms, I would have always advised government, if you have your internal generated revenue, after all, you're generating 36 trillion now, use it to pay anybody you want to do as you like. Those on economic roads and things and infrastructure that tickle your fancy, use those money to do those. But when it comes to where you have to borrow, the law is very explicit on what you should do with borrowing. Now, you come to then let's come to other conditions. The second condition is that it has to be long-term borrowing. And what do you understand to be long-term? 10 years, 20 to 30 years. It's long-term. That's what the law wants. And that's what the law says. But that's not what we're seeing. Because when you go for Euro bond for 1 year, 1.5 years, and then it's high interest rate, about 10%, you come to another part of that law. The law says, and it must be on concessionary terms. And then what do you understand to be concessionary terms? Usually around 3% or less. Sometimes you can even borrow for 40 years at 0%. I mean, you've got that kind of, or 1% or 0.5%. But that's not what you are seeing. When you begin to borrow, I mean, when you have the likes of Euro bond, which is for 1 or 2 years, and you are taking it at 10%, then you are not only not coming to terms with the tenure, you're also not coming to terms with the concessionary nature of the loan that is applied by law. And then you cannot justify taking short-term, high-interest rate loan to service long-term. It's a mismatch. And that's why Silicon Bank went bust. Short-term instrument to service long-term, lower-cost instrument. Anyway, keep that aside. Now, the law also says something. It says there must be cost-benefit analysis. Now, that is where the crunch comes. Now, when the law says it wants cost-benefit analysis, it is emphasizing that there must be an economic value in any borrowing that you are going to undertake, and you have to justify those. For more than 15 years, I've been asking for cost-benefit analysis for particular sense of where I've not been getting them. I've been asking. But the fact of the matter is this. What the law contemplates is this. If you are going to build infrastructure, which you may well do, whether it's rail or power line or road, highway or inland waterway, the law expects you, if you are going to borrow money to do those, to have a discussion on economic corridor. And what do I mean by that? Have a discussion to see whether those infrastructure will go through industrial corridor, commercial corridor, residential corridor, because that is going to guarantee activity on the infrastructure, so that there is a possibility that you can raise money to be able to service that loan, repair the infrastructure. If you have a highway going through Lagos to Ibadan and all that, that's going to be economic activity around the corridor. So if a PPP comes in, private sector comes in, I want to maintain it, I want to run it, there's revenue with which you can do that. And when you don't, it means that you can build infrastructure that leads to no man's land, and then the capability to repay it is zero. You are indebting the country. And then you now have to borrow more money to service that debt. So that is the catch. That is the area where it becomes really, really difficult for us to see how you can support those. And then, of course, there are other areas of things. For example, if you come to what are the things that exacerbate borrowing, is fiscal, or generally in economy, in macroeconomy, the trajectory is this: you must have investment. Because you're a developing economy, you have to continue to invest to develop. That's why you are called underdeveloped or developing economy, because you have to continuously develop both your manpower and your natural resources to create an economy. So you have to borrow. So that is investment. Now, when you get investment, the investment will now have to go to productive activity. And that is why the law says engage productive activity in your borrowing, because when you want to invest, you invest either your own money or you borrowed money. So that economic activity creates employment. Employment generates a surplus or generates disposable income. Then with disposable income, you can pay for education, pay for your health, and sustainably remove yourself and your dependencies out for poverty. And that is the cycle. Any other cycle is just robbing Peter to pay Paul. Do you understand? So that is the structure, but that is not what is going on. So when you come to Nigerian government wanting to do this, do that, all kinds of things, they don't. First of all, they use, where is your money? Go for your savings. If you haven't got any savings, then you go borrowing. And then if you know who goes are borrowing, goes are sorrowing. So the law now kicks in. Yeah, you want to borrow. What do you want to borrow for? And how are you going to, what are the criteria? Well, we are falling short of many of those criteria. But there is another way. The other way is to leverage the private sector. Our medium-term development plan 2021 to 2025, I chaired 3 of the technical groups in those. We estimated that we need 350 trillion naira to run that medium-term plan, of which only 50 trillion was going to be contributed by all levels of government. And then they now looked at private sector to bring the other 300 trillion. 85%, you are looking for private sector to bring that. So if you want private sector to bring that, then create a condition that is conducive for the private sector to engage. Have PPPs of some dimension and then honor your obligations. But those are lacking. They realize because we have plethora of cases, including even myself, where we have invested on a PPP and then the other leg was wobbling. So all kinds of, so you've got all that challenges. So that makes it even more difficult that the potential that you are having to deal with this are completely ignored. So where does that take us in terms of our discussion? What else can we say about management and mismanagement of the resources? Then you have budgeting framework. Now that law provides the framework for budgeting. It says you must have a fiscal strategy paper. And then those fiscal strategy paper gives you the basic assumptions upon which the budget is built. Then it now tells you about MTEF, the medium-term expenditure framework, which is the budgeting framework, but now lays out transparency issues, accountability issues, and prudence issues in the way you construct the budget and the way you arrive at those and how you manage them. The law is very, very clear on those. You have to have public hearing for when it goes to assembly. Assembly will have a public hearing when the finance sends out circular for budget. Then people need to involve. I speak on this budget, I think around September or something. I always speak in national audience of all these finance accountants. So it's part of the open consultation so that people now know that you are going into a new budget cycle and then they make their contribution. So those things are transparency related issues. But remember that the biggest transparency one that we have kept aside, we kept our tail, was the one of cost-benefit analysis, because it doesn't really matter. You must need to do that. So that's the process. The process goes on, and then eventually a budget is arrived at. Then there are laws kick in. Fiscal law comes back. It says we should not have more than 3% deficit to GDP ratio. Now they've moved it up to 4%.
Hello,
but that
hello, Prof.
ratio,
hello, Prof. Hello, Prof.
Yeah.
You are almost. We have enjoyed most of the discourse, and you have only 2 minutes to round up.
Well, that's good. Well, that's fine.
Because
fine.
we need to put in question and answer session. Yes.
All right, that's fine. All right, that's fine. The fact of the matter is that some of these things that I was saying, then the final bit on that law is about state-owned enterprises, where the law requires them to return 80% of their operating surplus. And World Bank worked with us at the Fiscal Responsibility Commission to develop a template which we are getting them to complete. The fact of the matter is that they have been running away with accountability and also with transparency. So they give you an account and then give Auditor General a separate account. Not the 2 accounts don't talk to each other. So it's an ongoing battle to get them to do those. But we also have a dimension of it with the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission. And I've just been training them on the new act on 2025 on how to assert themselves better and then make more contribution. So there's a lot to talk about, and I'm glad you narrowed this topic. But obviously the time won't allow me to say a lot more. So let me hope that questions will bring out more of the answers. Thank you very much. Hello.
Every will be able to send, some should send in their questions if possible, and while those few who are able to ask should be able to ask their question. Please, we give the next 5 minutes for question and answer. and then we'll take only 5 questions for now. Then the other question can come as typed on the platform. You can send in your questions. It will be addressed by Prof. Thank you. Please stand for question and answer, please. 5 minutes from now. Hello?
Hello, hello, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Hello. Please, if you have a question, kindly raise up your hand from the chat, from the Zoom app, so that the moderator can ask who to speak per time, so that we don't have too many people talking at the same time. Please.
I think
Moderator, sir, ACG Sunday, I think we have Chrisent Eze's hands raised up.
So can I go on?
Yeah, you can go on, sir.
Though my name is Eze Christian Chukuma JP. Sorry, I joined a little bit late, but I met where the prof was talking about budgeting and co. The question I want to ask is this. In their budgeting system, they will always make provision to pay for interest on borrowed money outside. But there's an issue that is on board. Like if you go to Ministry of Finance today, there is a department called PICA, P-I-C-A. That PICA, it was created to verify local debts that are due for payment, which the ministries cannot be able to pay. But since that establishment has been established, we have never heard where in any budget of the year where they said, okay, this amount is budgeted to settle those local debts that is under PICA, making it possible for liquidity to be in the society. So I want Prof to please guide us, or when next you'll be teaching them or asking questions, to ask a question, minister or the person involved or the people in the budget office, our local contractors that have been verified under PICA in the Ministry of Finance, what are they doing to help those local debts? Because since January this year, 2025, till today being October 1st, none of the local debts in such department has received 1 kobo nationwide. So I don't know what government has in stock. How do they budget for their local debts they are owing? Because we always hear that there's a money to pay for foreign debt or interest on foreign debt. That's my question.
Okay. Thank you, Christian. Let me come in here. Prof, if you can hear me, we'll just take the 3 questions, the 3 answers, and then you can answer them together. We have Dr. Kabiru Adamu also raising his hand, and then Shola Jaisimi. So if we can go in that order, and then you can answer their questions together. Dr. Kabiru.
Okay, good morning,
Okay.
Prof. Nice to link up with you again, as well as
Good morning, Kabir.
the organizers too. Thank you for organizing this. Indeed, it's honorable given that today is our independence anniversary. My question is on security. All of what you've said with regard to physical transparency, how does it affect the security sector? Given that, and I hope I'm not wrong, that the sector enjoyed or got the largest single sectoral allocation in our 2025 budget, and in fact in the 2024 budget as well. But we hear very little with regards to transparency. The second part of the question is there an appetite for this within the government to ensure enhanced transparency within the sector? Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Is Shola Jaitimi still there? Okay. All right. You have the floor, sir. Well, we can't hear you, Mr. Jaisimi. Maybe when your network is clear, we can. No, we can't hear you. If you can type your message, then Prof will answer.
Okay. So, Prof, thank you so much. Okay. Thank you, Prof, for your comments. Just a quick one.
Hello, Prof.
Yeah, I'm listening. I'm waiting for the question.
I think I will encourage him. I'll just send him a message. Type it. There's a struggle with his network. If you can answer the two questions, and then we'll get back to him.
All right. Now, the first question is very interesting, actually, because the process is the budget decides what needs to be paid, and you get the money to be paid. Then you get a borrowing list, which the DMO coordinates, and then that borrowing list, gets approved by the House, and then then there's a third one. The third one is which I started with, but I didn't finish it. I told you that when the law was passed in 2007, only one ratio was allowed in. It was only the deficit to GDP ratio. All the other ratios were discountenanced. And then because it was a battle. So then they now decided, okay, when the law was passed, it says within 6 months of passing this law, the Minister of Finance, with the consultation with the National Assembly, will now advise the Federal President on other ratios. What are the other ratios? Debt to service ratio is not there. Debt to GDP ratio is not there. For states, for federal, for local government, all of the ratios that are necessary to help you in macroeconomic, fiscal, they are not there. But anyway, let's go to the question. The question says, why is it that there's a discrimination between local debt and foreign debt? And then, and I can tell you this, we have rating agencies breathing down our neck. Those foreign debts that are in the list also have, they're part of the first line charge. So if the government defaults on any of those, our rating will go like boom. They will descend on us like a ton of bricks. So that's why you see the first priority is to service the foreign debts, and then you don't have that problem rain down on you. Then, of course, you go to defense to support the defense. Then you pay salaries. You don't want the workers out on the street. And then now you're now doing some of the flimsies. But the last man that gets money is capital expenditure. And that's why I'm so angry at this year's budget. Why do you overshoot the benchmark was $75 when you should be around 60, 65? Because the projections over the next 3 years is that the price of crude will be between 65 and 68. So why are you over budgeting? You only over budgeting because you want to punish capital expenditure. So that is where, because in the end of the day, at the end of December, almost 100% of all the other debts are paid, and not the debts, but the recurrent expenditure. Capital is the one that gets postponed to March, postponed again to June, and postponed to December. So it's part of our problem. But in terms of the private, this domestic debts, you just have to fight for it. Because when they release money, they said, oh, they're releasing, then everybody will keep quiet. And then suddenly they say they finish spending it, they'll go to another. So you've got to have to fight for those. Now, I come to the question of from this is on the security. This is very important. The very, very large allocations go to security for very good reason. This is a nation at war, and it's asymmetric warfare, and we've got to fight and defend the economy. Unfortunately, we are not borrowing so much for that, but we are spending so much for that. But anyway, so what happens is that you need a higher level of transparency. Yes, as you said, you need a higher level of transparency in the disbursement. Now, let me tell you, there are 3 things in the Act about transparency, accountability, and prudence. One is that the law says there should be full disclosure on public finance management. You don't get full disclosure. Number 2, the laws now came to say citizens should have a right, or what we call ouster of local standard in the Constitution, in the Act. It says any Nigerian citizen can go to a high court for a prerogative order on the enforcement of any of the items around transparency. But Nigerian citizens are not doing that. So that is the other thing. We must use our rights, but we don't. But let me tell you one of the reasons. One of the reasons is the third one. That when the law was contracted, they fought to remove penalties on infractions and all of that, and enforcement powers. So we are now fighting back to bring it in. Now that's the amendment, the amendment that is now being hitting there for more than 6 years in the Senate. They've got the first and second reading, but do the final one, the dilly-dallying. That amendment is asking for you to define infractions and then put punishment, 1 million and 1 year in jail. All that. They didn't want that. So what happens in the traditional thing is this: people, you see infractions from different ministries, and then you write a report. The report goes to the Attorney General's office and sits in his locker. You will wait and wait and wait and wait. Whatever goes on, all I know is that when you put too much pressure on him, he can pass it to IFCC. It will sit down there for another years and all that. So it doesn't get done. So and when you don't have punishment or penalties for infractions, you might as well forget it. So that doesn't encourage citizens. Because if you go to court, borrow your money, do all that, go to court, you get judgment. What are you going to enforce? What are you enforcing? So now, if you look at the act of RAMFAC, RAMFAC has now put 1 million, 10 million, even 1 year, 2 years, and that is where they are now going to bite. So that is the problem. Those are the 3 things. Because you don't have the power you don't have definition of these infractions and money that you have to be paid or imprisonment and what that, then your people are getting away with murder. These are the issues. I'm sorry, I could have given more answer, but I'm mindful of time.
Thank you, Prof. I'm wondering where ACG James is, but we really appreciate your time.
I'm here.
Okay. Please continue. Thank you.
I'm here. Yes. Thank you, Professor Ken, for this eye-opening exposition. He spoke about debt level, mismanagement, debt business around 81 to 82 oil boom, austerity measure, IMF debt, the era of cocoa, oil, granite, pyramid, and the cotton board that are no longer in existence. We haven't recovered from those lost grounds. Prof also spoke about debt situation between 2003 and 2005, which was about 30 billion as at then, but presently he gave a figure of about 100 billion. Then he also spoke about the DMO, that's the Debt Management Office, and their role, which they have not effectively been playing. And then he spoke about debt in exclusive legislative list, servicing of our debt, and everything government goes into debt servicing. Extra borrowing to pay for recurrent expenditure, which the law does not allow. Then the issue of our external debt and domestic debt, the percentages, debt sustainability issue. That debt is not a bad thing because even the US is into borrowing, but evidently everybody is moving away from the dollar now because very soon it will become an issue. So the yen and the China axis is becoming the next destination. Nigeria has gone for currency swap, and you can borrow but you leverage on development, which is very, very important in discussion. Then the eligibility for borrowing, both capital expenditure and for human development, which is very, very germane. On the conditional cash transfer, which is like a cash cow, it's very, very unprofessional for economic concept. Then the issue of Eurobond and concessional terms. The cost-benefit analysis, which it dwell on economic value in borrowing and must be justified. This is the area that's very, very important for the country. We must always have an economic value for our borrowing, and we must always justify it. If you have to build an infrastructure, which is very, very important, there must be discussion in related to economic and commercial corridors, where it will speak to the citizens and the people that this same infrastructure is supposed to benefit. So the infrastructure does not just lead to an area where there's no benefit to the people. So there must be an economic value, and it must be justified. And we must consider the economic value of that infrastructure and then the commercial interest that is in it. Very, very important. And then we are always borrowing without saving. So Prof dwells so much on we must learn to save and borrow less. And the PPP arrangement, which has always been the order of the day, but most times the obligation is not being honored. We also have the reason why there's dissemination between local and discrimination between local and foreign debt. Prof dwell on it extensively. And I think as a final word, accountability and probity is the key. People or officials of government always fail to disclose on expenditure, and citizens have the right to ask questions by following transparency order. So I think with this, Professor Ken has done justice to his own lecture. Those who ask questions also have asked very, very justified questions. Our next resource person is supposed to be Professor Freedom. Please, Professor Freedom.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Hello,
Yes,
can you
we
hear
can
me?
hear you, sir. You can go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Prof, we can hear you. Prof, we can hear you.
Hello?
Prof, we can hear you.
We
Hello,
can
can
hear
you hear
you.
me?
Good morning, sir. Yes, we can hear you. Good morning, sir.
Okay. Okay, thank you so very much. Let me first of all begin by thanking the Peace Building and Development Consult for the opportunity given to me to share my thoughts on a subject that I consider typical and topical. But before I go into sharing my thoughts, please permit me to say that I would wish to put off my video, and I'm sure you may have noticed I'm using my phone to make this intervention, and I consider it the very last resort, given the situation of very poor power supply where I am now, and of course, inevitably has also impacted on the quality of network supply. So I'm naturally not using the kind of facilities I normally use for this kind of engagement because of the power supply. So I think that it is better I put off my video, and that would also enhance the streaming of my interventions. I only put on the video right now so that perhaps those who may not know me would then have opportunity of putting a face to the name, such that after this presentation and we'll have reasons to run into each other, you can now say, okay, I am so person and I felt it's just important. So if that is permitted, I would wish to put off my video right now. Do I have your permission, the organizers?
Yes,
can you
go
hear
ahead.
me?
You can speak on. You can speak on, but you choose how you want. You choose how you want to present yourself. Yes.
Okay, no problem. I really don't have problem with the video. If I just hope that the network does not really impact. But if network starts impacting on the quality of the audio and the video, perhaps I might just on my own decide to switch. So let me first of all express my deepest gratitude to the organizers of this program.
Your face is old. Your face is old. We don't need it. It's old face. We don't need it.
Okay, thank you so very much. So, thank you for those very kind and jovial interventions. So, I want to thank the Peace Building Development Consult for the opportunity to join this August very experienced panel to share my thoughts on a subject I consider very topical and typical. I consider it topical, and I'm sure you know, given the centrality of the role of the youth in national development. I don't think there is any country or state in the world that this assumption about the centrality of the role of the youth to national prosperity, achievement and development does not apply. Whether you're talking about developing country or whether you're talking about developed country, you must reckon with the size and the competence of the youth, because the youth serve as a critical bridge connecting the oncoming generation with the outgoing generation. The result, therefore, is that the youth combines not only the energy of the very young ones that is coming up, but also serve as a reservoir for using the experiences of those who are living, like former President Olusegun Obasanjo will mention, those that are on the departure launch. That is quite a very unique position the youth occupies. But it's even very typical, given the fact that the context of their own experience in Nigeria is one that everybody definitely will agree with me, is one that is a bit pathetic, is a bit challenging. It's even all the more challenging given the fact that if you are following the news last 2 or 3 days, I'm sure you will know that ASU has also given federal government 14 days ultimatum to go on strike. Why do I bring this up? I bring it up because the threat of strike serves as a major sinew. It serves as a major cord that connects education, connects the youth, and then connects human capital development. Given that context, I think I will make my interventions at least 4 major levels. First is that I'm going to speak a bit about the philosophical underpinning that shows the connections between education, youth unemployment or youth development, and then human capital development and overall national prosperity. Then I'll give a bit of an idea about how we are and where we are in the context of the demographic of the youth and the demographics or statistics around youth unemployment in Nigeria. Then in the third level of intervention, I will maybe speak at some of the issues around the challenges of youth unemployment in Nigeria in relation to issue of education. And then I will quickly try to highlight, some of the consequences of the disconnect we are having between education and the competence and capacities of the Nigerian youth. I will try to spare some thoughts around recommendations, hoping that if I'm able to run through these 4 streams of my intervention, it should inform the kind of lively debate or discussion I will have. So let's just really begin with the whole idea of the philosophical underpinning about the youth. I did mention that the youth is a critical bridge connecting the oncoming generation of any country and the outgoing generation. But it's quite a very critical demographic category. In most cases, given the size of the youth, the energy of the youth, and the aggressiveness of the youth to explore reality. So in most cases, the size of the youth or the youthful population of a country, coupled with the competencies and the capacities that this demographic category possess, to a very large extent, is key, to determining if this natural resource called youth will become either a gold mine for that country or inevitably turns out to be a landmine for that country in terms of the consequences that go with having such an energy and such size and not being properly harnessed for national development. And so my argument in this point is to say that, look, a key mitigating or exacerbating factor, and I mean mitigating means a factor that may likely reduce the potentials of the youth becoming a major landmine for national development, national stability, and national prosperity is education. But it's also going to be an exacerbating factor, for example, where you have large number of persons receiving education, but also not having opportunity to leverage the competencies, the skills, and the knowledge they've acquired in order to become productive citizens of that country. So in a sense, therefore, education now serves the key role, in terms of building human capital, basically by impacting skills on the citizens and impacting knowledge. So I will therefore, and I'm persuaded to therefore argue that, effective human capital development through relevant, focused, skill-focused education will be critical to reducing unemployment. It will be very, very important in terms of boosting overall economic growth and development, and more importantly, as such, will be very important in terms of fostering national prosperity. And I cannot think of any country where the contextual and the existential realities clearly underpin and underscore some of these experiences we are having than in our own country, Nigeria, and we are trying to celebrate independence, raising a whole lot of questions as to what extent have we been able to invest in education, to what extent have education played a key role in building the competencies, skills, knowledge, and capacities of the Nigerian youth, and to what extent has this contributed to overall human capital development in order to foster and sustain national development. Of course, we know that we are a country of very large population, moving quickly and closely to about 250 million population. Some estimates say that we are 230 million by 2024. I just don't know, but let's put it at least the baseline. We're a country of over 200 million persons. And incidentally, the youthful population of Nigeria accounts for close, if not slightly above, 17% of these 200 million plus persons. But the greatest worry is that even of these 70% that are of this population, we have a situation whereby about 50 to 55% of the youthful population are either underemployed or they are completely unemployed. And this raises a question, therefore, why would we have such a human population? Why would we have such a very critical demographic category? And we also having them not acquiring the kind of education they need, or even when they acquire the kind of education they need, they are not really most suitable to be employed in the labor market. That creates a whole lot of challenges. And for me, I think that has to do with the nature of both the macro and the macro context of the Nigerian state. And when I'm talking about the macro, I'm just talking about our very low level individual life experiences, but more importantly, the macro larger economic realities, political economic realities of Nigeria. When such an individual moves beyond having acquired knowledge, skills, and competencies from, say, a university, a secondary school, and then move into the labor market and should be able to now use those skills more productively to earn a living for himself and contribute to national development. In the context of Nigeria, I think part of the issue has to do with the state of the educational sector. I don't think the problem is the size of the youthful population. I think that where the major disconnect could be located is at the level of the nature and the state of education in Nigeria. Nigeria is such a country, and I can't really pin out any particular past or successive administration that have paid the kind of needed attention ought to be paid to the educational sector, particularly in the area of focused political leadership and attention, but more importantly, in the area of resource allocation, to have the kind of educational system and structure that is fit for purpose, one that has the capacity to produce a new generation of Nigerian youth that are capable of achieving the right level of skills, the right level of knowledge, to be able to deal with the current developmental challenges and also prepare to deal with the evolving ones that will come in the near future. A major setback in this regard, I'm sure I'm talking to Nigerians, of course, is the issue of funding. Of course, the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization did suggest that in terms of the benchmarking for resourcing the educational sector, that nations should try as much as possible, to spend between 15 to 26% of their gross domestic product in supporting and resourcing the educational sector. And this is not just for purposes of citing statistics. I think that there is a very sound reasoning behind that, because education builds the skills and knowledge of any individual, enabling such individual to unleash such potentials in a scale and speed that brings about productivity. And then when you now aggregate our individual skills and knowledge and our individual skills, capabilities, and productivity, then you can begin to talk about the critical mass of human capital development in that country. That is key, to unleashing national powers and national potentials, to attain the highest level of development. But in the context of Nigeria, the educational system and the youth are always confronted with a lot of challenges. So I will speak to a few of those challenges, connecting them to education and also connecting them to the realities of the Nigerian youth, and then how that also impedes human capital development. Of course, the first one we know is usually the whole debate about the disconnect between the educational sector and then the realities of the labor market. Increasingly, we have seen the Nigerian University Commission, working with other critical stakeholders in the educational sector for us to continuously overhaul and reform our curriculum. But in reality, I'm sure you know, some of the educational tools, the curricula we are using in our schools, whether you're talking about primary schools, secondary schools, and universities or other tertiary institutions, are completely disconnected with the realities of the global labor market. We are already talking about the era of artificial intelligence, in terms of knowledge generation, knowledge production, and the utilization of knowledge. But across many of the Nigerian universities, you will still see lecturers using a white marker board and then writing on the wall or writing on the board. And then some persons also find it even extremely difficult. In fact, in some universities, when you see a lecturer presenting a lecture with a tablet or with a laptop, it appears as though that is actually not the right thing to do. But in the 21st century, we are talking about teaching people with smart boards that are real time connected to the internet. And I will give a typical example. At the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, have that legendary privilege of being the one that started a course called Introduction to Strategic Studies, and I'm also handling strategic and defense studies for our final year student in the Department of Political Science. And in most cases, when I start teaching these students, for example, critical issues that are evolving, when we are talking about maritime security, and we are trying to let these students understand the 5 critical maritime spaces and zones. We are talking about, the coastal waters, the territorial waters, the exclusive economic zone, the contiguous zone, and then the high seas. You are like talking to people who are looking at you like an entertainer, because these children, most of them, are not actually from coastal communities. And even if they are from coastal communities, they cannot really connect what you are teaching, because there is no real life situation where you can use latest technology to demonstrate when you are measuring from the baseline of the country far deeper into the ocean and to the sea, so that they will understand when you're talking about the coastal waters, the territorial waters, the exclusive economic zone, the continental shelf, and then of course the high seas. You don't have to blame them, but these are people who are going to come and find themselves in a competitive global market that requires somebody not just having this kind of knowledge, but even creating knowledge over and above the kind of one they've actually received in the university. So we also still attach ourselves teaching students with old curriculum, whereas the world has gone too far in terms of embracing new technologies and new competencies that will require them, to function effectively in the labor market. So you now saw a fundamental mismatch between the kind of curriculum we are using to teach them and, of course, the expectations you see in the global market. Connected to that, and also as a corollary to what I've mentioned, is the issue of the very terrible dysfunctional educational system we have in Nigeria. And I think I'll just mention 3 of them. And I've mentioned one in passing. First is that we have an educational system, particularly at the public universities, that have become increasingly unreliable. It has become increasingly unreliable because if you look at the statistics we had about during 2022, between 1999 and 2022, the country has suffered at least 17 strikes, embarked upon by the ASU. Most people are quick to criticize ASU when we embark on strikes, particularly, including those of you who will be listening to me here, that will be very quick to criticize ASU. And I laugh over your criticism because most of you will just sit down, send your daughter or your child to come to University of Nigeria so can start disturbing us, and you want us to produce the best of your daughter or your best of your son in an environment that is completely unconducive for learning. And I've just, impromptu, just gave you an idea of the realities that we have when we are teaching students. So you come to an educational system where there's little or no government support to build the capacity of that educational system. I understand that I'm being recorded, but I am also prepared, to take the consequences that will come from it. Because I think when we start speaking truth to power, we might begin to address the realities of our situation. And I said this because it's going to precede what I'm going to say. I had the very privilege of getting my first degree, my master's, my PhD from the very same department I have returned to become a professor, and I'm teaching currently. And it might strike some of you to hear that in the very classroom that I sat and received learning, I think if my memory is not failing me, I think I received learning with about 72, maybe I'm not up to 72 of us then, because I know our lecturers know us by our very first and last names. So that gives you an idea of the manageable size of my undergraduate days in the university. So that same classroom that I received my training in political science from first year to final year is exactly the same classroom in size, in height, maybe a bit of difference in color, and the blackboard that I am teaching well over 350 students. Well over 350 students. When combined students join my class, strategic and defense studies, so we were talking about a population, crawling very close to 420 students. The reality is that, and my students laugh a lot when I joke about this. The reality is that some of them will not even bother themselves to try to come to class early, because no matter how all of them rush to come to class early, the seating capacity is just about 110 or about 120. And in most cases, I used to joke them, with some of these guys. You see some of them who are desperate to learn, and you see a boy lapping a girl. That's not the best of experience for a lecturer to be seen in the class when we are teaching. But for us who understand the predicaments and the constraints, we can see from that point of view that it is the desperation on the part of those young ones to learn that make them to allow a boy to lap a girl and to learn from the classroom. I'm therefore trying to let so many of you who are parents here to understand. Perhaps sometimes you need to go to the classroom to see where people are teaching your daughters and children, so that when us you go on strike, you may begin to understand it's not so much about money. It's not actually not about money, because I know how much I earn. My salary has not changed in the last 10 years. But it's about our concern to improve facilities. So I'm already talking about even the physical infrastructure like classrooms. I'm not talking about latest technology like smart boards that is critical to enhancing learning. Connected to it again, while we're talking about university system, is the problem of the very terrible issues around the unreliability of power supply. Many people do not know if there is any sector of this country that requires 24/7 electricity, is the university system. It is actually the university system, because what we are is the laboratory for the production of human knowledge. And so the people who produce today are the ones that are going to man the sectors, whether they're calling them doctors, whether they are going to be even engineers and stuff like that. So if the factory they are going to operate requires electricity, what of us that are the primary laboratory for producing them to go into those factories? Across the universities, you have terrible power supply. And I'm sure you know, if you're a Nigerian, that we're already having such a situation currently, and which is even impacting on my comfort to be able to deliver this intervention. So we have got to a point where we have a national grid that is collapsing faster than the rate at which the technicians are resurrecting them. And when these situations are happening, it's impacting education, it's impacting training, it's impacting those of them who are teaching students and courses that requires laboratory experiments. And that is why these people will open your child's stomach, or even open your stomach and forget one or two scissors while they are doing that operation. Because right from their training context, right from the training in the universities, they do not have a very reliable predictive system that would ensure that these guys can actually acquire the best of knowledge to be much more competent when we offload them into the labor market. Of course, the issue that even when we train them and we say they are half-baked graduates, some of them have this ingenuity, some of them have this trick of innovation. But how do they begin their startups? You are talking about a country where it's even extremely very difficult for those who have landed property to access loan. how much more some of the students will produce. And I agree with every sense of sincerity and humility. I agree when you qualify them as half-baked graduates. I am among those who are baking these graduates that I have. I accept that. And I'm saying that they're actually half-baked because the oven is not properly done to produce a refined product. So even when we produce them in this context as half-baked, the reality is that they even find it extremely difficult to access loan. Those of them who wants to leave and dump the certificate we've given them and trying to pursue their life calling also find it extremely difficult to access loan. The result, therefore, is that the youth are now facing double tragedy. First, they have acquired the certificate. Second, the certificate is not even being useful. And then even when they want to diversify or move into another lane to pursue their stars and their character and their traits, you also find it extremely difficult for them to access that kind of loan. And I'm sure you know the common refrain among the Gen Zs when they say, who education help? It is not that they actually hate education. It is just because plus or minus, they are even finding it extremely difficult to see those who have acquired education living a decent life. And like I used to make jest of some of my students, I always tell my students, if I'm teaching and you are looking at my legs, you get an F. Because students always have this character of assessing the material condition of their lecturer by looking at the nature of their shoe. So if their shoe is bent one side or their shoe is tattered, they know that you're actually living on penury. In fact, you belong to the Flossam and the Jessams of society. So, and you are teaching generation of young persons with very tech-savvy minds, very inquisitive, and you are telling them education holds a lot of prospects for them, and your shoes are tattered, and you do not look inspiring. They do not see any reason why they should even listen to you, let alone hope that what they are hearing from you can help to change their future. This is where the reality is in Nigeria. And this is what people are not bringing up to in terms of national conversation. And that is why I'm speaking from the heart to really tell you, because I'm a teacher, because I'm a practitioner, I'm in the field, and I also know what is happening in the labor market, to say these are the realities that is facing us in terms of education, in terms of building the competencies of the youth, and in terms of the youth plugging into the labor market, and of course, the consequences for us in terms of our low national productivity. The last one I would like to mention is the one that we just laugh over it, is the issue of corruption across all levels of society. Corruption at the university, corruption at the departmental level, and of course, corruption at the political level. If there's any reason why we are not funding education properly in this country, I think again is as a result of the nature of widespread corruption at the political level, giving inspiration to those who are looking at them at the ministerial level to connect to that political corrupt way of living. And then with that corruption persisting and prevailing in a society without consequences, if it comes to the university, the corruption will continue at the university and management level. And then when it can step to the level of department, again, the corruption will continue. And so when a lecturer is not too sure of the kind of money he will earn at the end of the month, he will have to find coping mechanisms. Two coping mechanisms are easily available to a lecturer. The number one coping mechanism is that he will call your daughter or your son and make it abundantly clear to your daughter or your son that, you see, this book I suffered and spent energy to write and publish, you must buy it. It's very clear. They'll tell you must buy it, at least, even if you have an F, take it to your father to show that you did my course. So that's number one. Yeah, but why would a lecturer intimidate and force a student to buy it? That in itself is actually an unethical behavior. But in itself, that unethical behavior is key for his own survival. At least he has to be alive today to be able to teach your second son that will come to the university. So the second point, of course, you hear of sorting, and that's another form of corruption in university. Why wouldn't he sort? If a professor in Nigerian university is taking $500 US, and when I'm talking about $5 US, we are talking about something slightly over 250. It's taking less than 500,000 naira, or about 500 something thousand naira. And when we take it to US dollars, we are talking about something slightly below $300 US. And you expect people who toil 247 to train themselves in PhD, toil 247 to write journal articles, toil 247 to spend a lot to be assessed and get to the level of a professor, seeing their own children not being able to go to school. Come on, let us be very realistic. In as much as we want to be riding on a very high level of morality, morality is not disconnected from the materiality of human existence. And I say this with every sense of seriousness. So where you have people living in abject poverty, morality becomes something that is secondary in their consideration. So I am not trying to make excuses for lecturers. There are lecturers who have been able, to build their competencies and capacities and connect to the global world and is making a lot of money that they are using, in order to mitigate this poor salary. But it comes in as a consequence for their health. And I'm a typical example in that regard. Those of you who know me very well understand where I'm coming from. In order to make ends meet, I don't have to work extended time in consultancies and other things, but I also combine it to the work I'm doing with the university. But if I'm paying very well, something commensurate with my skills, competencies, and exposure, I don't think I will take up some of the consultancies I'm taking because I know at the long term it's going to impact on my health. So what is the consequences of having a major disconnect between an educational system, the labor market?
Professor Freedom, you have 5 more minutes to round up, Professor Freedom. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. That 5 minutes is even more than generous because I think I've laid down the key issues. The other one is just to use 2-3 minutes to speak on the consequences. Consequence number one, and I mentioned, when you have an educational system that is not producing the right kind of persons to fit into the labor market, you are doing two things. One, you are producing people who have knowledge, but that knowledge will be diverted into criminality. So you see a lot of Yahoo boys making EFCC fame, even though that shouldn't be the priority of EFCC, because the issue of corruption at the political level should be its primary consideration, not these young boys moving around carrying laptop, because their own action is a symptom of a deeper political malaise in this country. So we produce people, there's no job for them, but then they have the competencies based on their experience of understanding computer, using computer, and then they are already trying to diversify that competence into criminality. That's the first problem we are seeing. The second one, which is even the tragedy for this country, and I say it with every sense of seriousness, the greatest tragedy lying before this country is the fact that because of the disconnect between education and the labor market, there is already an ingrained and growing disdain for formal education among this generation. When you hear these young ones say, who education help, please don't laugh like a fool. It should be a reason for you to sit down and begin to think deep. When your child is saying, who education help, he's already trying to tell you that education is completely useless. And this is where we are going to have a lot of problems for the future, because if those we are producing to build the skills and human capital of Nigeria for the 21st century are telling you that education does not help anybody, I just don't know where we are going to import people who are going to teach them. The third one is, of course, the consequences. It's already impacting on overall national productivity because we are producing square pegs that are being put in round holes, or we are not producing pegs at all, but we are putting them in either round holes or square holes. The consequence, therefore, is that we are, as a nation, producing, sustaining, and reproducing mediocrity. That is really why we are having the problem we are having. Across the major sectors, we have people who occupy key positions with first degree, give them simple assignment, and they cannot deliver on that. That is part of why we are having the recrudescence of mediocrity in Nigeria. The last consequence, of course, is the issue of the Japa syndrome. I hope you know that increasingly this country is losing the best and the brightest of its brain to countries around the world. And these countries are even becoming very much adept in the way they are approaching it. They are reviewing their visas, tightening their visas, and making sure that their visa system is still open to get the best and the brightest from our country. And they are reaping so much from it. Look at Nigerians heading to Australia. Look at Nigerians going to Canada. Look at Nigerians going to the US, going to China, going to Japan. It is not these ones that sag their trousers, pick their teeth, and then do yahoo yahoo. They are the best in the critical professions you can think about, in STEM, in tech, in medical, in pharmaceutical, in health. So we are already losing it as a nation, but I don't think we're having the conversation we're supposed to have. 2 minutes for me to round off. What are my critical recommendations? Number one, if you have opportunity of talking to those who are operating in the realm of political corridor of this country, if they don't want us to face a major tragic situation, all these things we are talking about insecurity in Nigeria, we are still just joking. The tragedy is on the way and it is coming very fast with fury. If we do not do anything to revamp our educational system and make sure that our educational system is done to be fit for purpose and create a system that will absorb these youths, the tragedy is already knocking at the door because Nigeria's population is going to explode, but the competencies and the opportunities are not exploding to unleash national productivity to absorb them. The result, therefore, is that I can predict with every sense of finality and confidence that this country is going to witness an amazing level of insecurity going forward. If we do not see the clear connection between education, the quality of the youth we produce, and then national productivity that will absorb the teeming population we are producing. Second one, we should go beyond giving our youth shoe shining kits, giving them barrows, giving them motorcycle to go and die in accident. That is not targeted youth empowerment. The money our politicians, our senators are wasting, claiming they are doing constituency project, is completely useless. We can put these resources together and create critical centers for vocational training education. These days, I don't know how many of you who are building. Somebody said that my face is very old, and I understand because it's as a result of dexterity and working in this academic sector. That's why I'm older than my age. I don't know if any of you has been lucky to be building houses in Nigeria now. If you are lucky, I'm not talking about one of the estate ones that are doing. I'm talking you are toiling and you're building your own house. I am sure you know what you are now struggling to get people with skills. Getting masons now is a problem. Getting professional tilers is now a problem. People are interested in picking their teeth in a hotel and throwing paper rather in Yahoo. I am saying that we must begin to prioritize education, not the one that we are talking about teaching University of Nigeria and Soka. We must complement that education with vocational training education. We need to begin as a matter of agency with speed and purpose and intention, begin to develop critical hubs for vocational technical education in this country. Certify such technical education and have a system that fixes certain amount of minimum pay for such kind of education when they are going to be employed. In that way, we'll be producing PhD holders that are not going to begin to drive trailer for Dangote, but we'll produce PhD holders that are at the critical area of knowledge production, producing the right kind of persons that will actually drive the Nigerian development project. We must reform our curriculum. Our curriculum has to be reformed in such a way that it will understand the existential realities of the Nigerian political economy, but at the same time also embrace the evolving technologies, changes, and global dynamics in such a way that will produce the next generation of human capital that can solve our problem and also compete at the global scale. We must begin also to have that kind of private-public sector partnership. It must go beyond philanthropism. It has to be intentional, it has to be focused, because that is the only way we are going to forestall the impending tragedy. Because when we have population explosion in the face of dwindling job opportunities, then the opportunity for major insecurity explosion is staring us in the face. The last one, infrastructure. If we improve infrastructure, particularly the one I'm mentioning, national grid collapsing faster than it's being resurrected. If we improve infrastructure, particularly electricity, and forgo this whole idea of trying to create a coastal road when climate change is going to wash those roads off, we must prioritize our infrastructural investment. We must look at kind of infrastructure that's supposed to be priority number one in this country. If we had plunked the money we are using to construct road that maybe water will flow in resuscitating our national grid, it's going to have multiplier effect. All the money we have now in Nigeria should be targeted at building electricity. If you have electricity, small and medium scale industries will grow. If you have electricity, more Dangote companies will flourish. If you have electricity, you will have the best of universities that can teach
Professor Freedom, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor.
Very much.
Let's do room
I
for
think
questions.
I've raised some of the issues. And finally, please, I know before you cut on me, I'm trying to report to this house that my battery is now 5%, underscoring the tragedy we are facing as a nation. So in case I disappear and I don't answer your question, don't think that I'm afraid of answering any question, but it underscores the centrality of the very terrible situation we are in this country. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to have me.
Thank you very much, Professor Freedom, the erudite scholar who has dispensed all the energy that is expected. I hope Professor Kade, Dr. Kade, you are going to refoil him because he has exhausted energy. Thank you very much. It's time for question and answer. We have only opportunity for 5 also. Please be snappy. Question and answer session, please.
Good morning, everyone. I have a question on the message chat.
Okay. Okay, can I pick that question? I'm seeing it now.
Please, please go ahead, because I have a question there that for Professor Freedom for your last discussion. Looking
Okay,
at
thank
the
you.
Okay, go ahead, please. Let me know this time.
Yeah, I'm seeing your question. Your question is, how can Nigeria liberate its youthful population by transitioning its education from just certificate focus to a driver of human capital development, entrepreneurship, innovation, and job creation? Thank you so very much, sir. I do hope that if you listen all through, it's very likely you posed this question before I got to my recommendation. But if that is the situation, let me just rehearse one of my recommendations. I strongly want to commend you for this question. We have become a certificate-oriented economy and politics, which is very, very funny. I'm sure you know that the number of PhD holders we are producing is already competing with the number of masters we are producing in the university. And as someone in the university, I keep on laughing and making jest of those who are coming for PhD, because we have reduced PhD certificate to first degree to use it to employ them. Now, the reality is very simple. I mentioned about skills. Education is not so much about the one you read and write. That's what they call vocational technical education, VTE. And that is an educational aspect that has been long and seriously neglected in this country. We can standardize our vocational training education. And I mentioned it. This is the senators and people go and say they are doing constituency projects. We don't know what those projects are. Let's take, for example, we create a vocational training center that operates at 3 levels. We call it primary vocational training education, secondary vocational training education, and advanced vocational training education. And it is certificated. And you can enter this training education without necessarily having, in fact, passing 6 might be the only thing you need. So just passing 6, so that at least you can write your name. When you have Freedom as one of your clients, you can at least write Freedom's name and the title of the work he has brought to you and the amount. We can start with that primary 6. Somebody can, after primary 6, move into tiling right away. He can do elementary tiling, and he's certified at that level of elementary tiling, enabling him to go to the second level of tiling, which is secondary tiling, and then go to the advanced level of tiling, and is properly certificated. Imagine if we have this kind of advanced 3-level VTE training, make it standardized, the way we are having federal universities across the geopolitical zone, make it standardized across the zones, and then encourage state governors also to begin to do something like this. And we have a national board that regulates such a training and certification, and work with the Nigerian revenue, salary, and blah, 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 blah. These things can be done and say, okay, the least you can pay such a person, as they do in the West. When I mean the West, Europe and America. If you have such a skills, they can pay you on the basis of hours you worked, or they can pay you on the nature of the job you do. If you have this kind of persons having this kind of unique skills that are certified, that don't need to have masters and PhD, that they can comfortably come and tile your kitchen or your toilet, and it will look like the one you are seeing in Hilton, Nikon Hilton. You cannot pay a lot of money for that. Everybody should not have PhD like Professor Freedom Onua, because people can do well without having PhD. And I know some of these guys beyond Silicon Valley do not even have PhD.
Professor Freedom, I think you have addressed the question. Let's move to the next question, please. Thank you.
Question or not? They said you have highlighted my list with face, but what do we say when someone can brag to you that I have paid my 4M in 4 years' time and I'll have my PhD as its only exam I will go to write? Whoever that asked this question, I'm sure you know when I spoke about the cascading nature and the pervasiveness of corruption in Nigeria. It is as simple as answered now. We operate a country where at the political level, corruption is actually the major factor that opens door for you. In the university, it's not different from the macro system. The only thing I can tell you is that that's the reality. But I can also tell you that there are some professors in that university that will not accept that PhD to be gotten by mere paying for that. Maybe you might need to go and ask some questions about some professors in the Faculty of Social Sciences, and people can list to you those who will not do that. I don't want to say it to appear as if I'm self-elation. Go and ask about me. Most of the PhD students doesn't even want me to supervise them because they think they will not graduate. And the reason is very simple. I'm a very poor professor, but I don't think you are going to give me any money for me to graduate you when you do not do the work. And I'm also not saying that I may not have some colleagues who will accept that money. But if you understand the dynamics of PhD program, it's about the individual, it's about the supervisor, it's about the department, it's also about the PG school. There's very little you can do if the individual has a way of influencing some of these levels I've mentioned. But I can assure you that within the Nigerian universities, there's a lot of persons who still keep their feet down and insist that those students must do the right thing. They may not do the perfect thing, but they may do something that is measurable for them to get their PhD. So that's the much I can say. You know, I'm sure you heard about a former minister in China who has been convicted on corruption. I'm sure you know that if we start that in Nigeria, the number of PhD applicants we will have, I suspect you are a lecturer.
Professor Freedom,
Sir?
I think it's time for us to also earn our PhD from you from this platform. So let me go into the review of what you have digested so that we can move on to the next lecture. Thank you, Professor Freedom, for being detailed about and passionate about the youths. And my prayer is that the man that actually saw your face value it. That's what he's trying to say, that this is a face of value. So we value you immensely because you have delivered and you are still delivering. The first thing
he's my friend, though. He's my friend, though. I don't mean to say he's my friend.
No,
though.
I said anybody that, but when you see my, yes, I'm just giving an example with that. Even with myself, if you see my gray hair, you would think I'm older than all of you, but I'm not. It's just because of the work we have done for this country. So thank you very much. So, Professor Freedom, you dwell on power supply and centrality of the role of the youth in national prosperity. You say we must also reckon with the size and competence of the youth. And you gave us the example that the youth are like the bridge between oncoming generation and those on the departure launch. That's the legacy club. The legacy club are those individuals who are supposed to actually engrave their names in gold. And then you dwell on education, unemployment, youth discrimination in appointments, and disconnect between education and competency. And then you also talked about size of the youths, the competency and the capability, which you describe as the national resource call for the youth. You said there are certain factors reducing potentials of the youths, and education is part of it. Large number receiving education, no opportunity to leverage their competency through employment. You also spoke about contextual and existential reality with respect to education of the youths. And you gave example of the population that we are within the range of 200 million, but the youth are about 70%. And within this 70%, 50% are unemployed by statistic or by whatever configuration. And you say, are we talking about suitability of such youth to getting employed or capability? These are questions that need to be answered. Then the nature and state of education in Nigeria. You focus on both political leadership, especially allocating resources for the education system, which is very, very important. And what are the various setbacks and the individual skills, capability, and development, and then the disconnect between the curricula and the global labor market. Teaching people with smart board connected to internet instead of writing on the board or analog style of teaching. Very, very important for upgrading our teaching process. I also gave example why some in the medical practice will forget scissors or cutting in the stomach of their patient because some of them were trained and then they didn't get the best of the training, particularly in public schools. Need for real life situation by using technology for explanation and illustration. That is very, very important. The youths are challenged by a competitive global market, and that is another area. Then you spoke about recycled curriculum, where lecturers will bring their old curriculum and start using it for this generation. This generation have gone beyond that. Then education system at public institution is very, very unreliable. You gave example with about 17 different strikes that must have been embarked by ASU. And then you talk about the environment that is unconducive for learning. with little or no government support. And then you also spoke about yourself. The same class where you had your first degree, your master's degree and PhD, and then you are about 72 as at then, is being occupied by about 400 students today, and with the same kind of setting. Students lapping each other in class, which is a sign of zeal and commitment to learning. Improve infrastructure and facility to enhance learning. And then you also spoke about national grid needs. There's need for the youth also to learn how to work on the national grid instead of allowing government alone to do it, because this should be another opportunity for them to make more money. And you also spoke about, okay, under your consequences, you spoke about knowledge that's diverse to criminality. That's the young generation diversing their knowledge to criminality, such as Yahoo because of lack of job, but have competencies, which is, you say it's not a license for criminality anyway. Then the disconnect between education, growing disdain for education, where you to say who education help. By the grace of God, we are looking at a generation that education will help in the future. Imparting on national productivity, producing square and round holes for square and round pegs. So that's very important. Then the issue of jackpot syndrome and brain drain. Tightening their nation tightening their visa while opening visa for the best of our youths. Then under your recommendation, you recommend that there should be revamping of our education system, quality of the youths produced, and national productivity. We should stop giving the youths motorcycles and keke napep that has become a menace in the society. The political class are fond of doing that as their constituency project, and they end up using the youths as keke napep users or whatever, or Okada riders. PhD holders driving trucks, yes, it's common in some other claim, but the amount they pay them is high. So we are not expecting our PhD holders to be driving or to be driving Dangote truck or whatever. Then there should be reform in our curriculum, existential nature of our curriculum, to turn them with economic and political landscape. Then the PPP project should not be a philanthropy project that is being given to friends and cronies if we want the system to work. Thank you very much. The next person on our lecture is Professor Danjibo. If Professor Danjibo is ready, please, you can link up and then we proceed.
All right. Can you hear me? Good. I think we are in the afternoon now. Good morning, if you can hear me. Hello.
Good
We
morning,
can hear you,
Prof.
Prof.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Continue, Prof. Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning. Once again, let me wish us happy, I don't know whether we say independence, happy political independence day. And I also want to join others to appreciate the good friends who are working with the Peace Building Consult for organizing this session. I'm asked to speak on security and fragility, the rise of insurgency, banditry, and militancy in post-independence Nigeria. So I'd like to just say that the Nigerian political development case is actually a paradox. It's a paradox in the sense that a long time ago, I had listened to, the late Maitama Sule, who gave an interview to BBC Hausa many years back. And he started by, showing the prospects that this country had and ended up with a sad note. Why? He said, right before independence, Nigeria, alongside China, Brazil, and India, were classified as 4 nations that could join the Committee of the Developed Nations within a decade, in 10 years. And that out of the 4 countries, Nigeria was actually ranked highest because of its both human and material resources. And that was why from between 1957 and 1966, the founding fathers of this country committed so much and invested so much to making sure that Nigeria actually materialized that expectation. And he gave classical examples. He said, for example, they introduced the development plans. And part of the development plans was what made them to build a Jakarta, Jebba Dam, paper mills all over. And that was because they were working assiduously to making sure that this country became a great nation within the 10 years time frame that the Committee of Developed World was expecting Nigeria to become. Now, he said something that was very significant. He said, as at the time the coup took place, the first coup took place in 1966, he was the Minister of Power, Steel, and Petroleum, combining three great ministries. And that when the coup took place, he didn't have money to send his family back home from Lagos to Kano. So his Igbo friend had to give him money to be able to put his family in a train to send them back to Kano. And when they got back to Kano, they could only stay in his father's mud house because for 9 years that he held those powerful ministries, he didn't have money even to build a house. So he then asked a rhetoric question, and he said, what minister today in this country will be appointed for 1 month and will not be able to have a house in Abuja, for example? So it gave us an idea of the sacrifices that the founding fathers, until tomorrow. You know, I'm from Kebbi State. I did my studies in Sokoto, partly in Sokoto. If you go to Sokoto till tomorrow, you could only point at Sir Ahmadu Bello's mud house next to the Sultanate. And then people committed themselves to making sure that this country would become a great nation. Now it has become a paradox. So I started with this anecdote so that we would go back, you know, to the main topic that was assigned to me, security and fragility. There's always, you know, this big debate. If we look at Maitama Sule's, you know, legendary assessment of this country, now India, China, Brazil, you'll be asking yourself, where are these nations today? These were nations that were assessed behind Nigeria even as at 1960. So where is Nigeria today? We are struggling. And I'm happy that Freedom Honor had talked about the state of education. I want to also give a second anecdote. Long time ago, when I was the president of Balewa Hall, you know, here in the University of Ibadan, you know, we got some donations of books by Heinemann Publishers. So we went to thank Chief Hugo. As at that time, you know, UI just came up with a new blueprint and says it wanted to mutate into becoming a graduate university. And what was the justification? That it wanted to be one of the best universities in sub-Saharan Africa. And then when we visited Chief Hugo, you know, the publisher of Heinemann, he was, the old man was practically shedding tears. And he pulled out his drawer, brought out the newspaper where UI gave that kind of justification. And he said, can you imagine? I graduated from the University of Ibadan in 1958. I went to the University of Leeds in the UK. I was the only person that didn't write a qualifying examination. Why? Because at that time, the University of Ibadan was assessed to be one of the 3 best universities in the entire Commonwealth. So now, here is a University of Ibadan struggling to be one of the best in sub-Saharan Africa. Does that show you anything? So, militancy. So let me just come back to our topic, militancy. I consider militancy, banditry, and insurgency as forms of what? The expression of the democratization of crime and insecurity. So I mean the democratization of crime and insecurity. And I want to ask this question. Do you think that if Nigeria were to be under really military rule today, would have been experiencing banditry, insurgency, and militancy? I don't think so. So these things came with the democratization of the spaces, and then people had the opportunities, and then, of course, politics came into it. And for each of those, whether you want to say it's militancy or insurgency or banditry, at the heart of which, will be politics. At the heart of it will be politics. Now, militancy started in the Niger Delta, eventually, between 1999 and to this moment. How did it start? How did it come about? At the forefront, we had issues of horizontal inequality, underdevelopment of the Niger Delta, the fact that Nigerian state was making a lot of resources from oil in that part of the country, and then, of course, not even throwing peanuts to the communities. Well, that was how it started. And then that gave room for young people, to start agitating, no, this cannot continue. And so we had some groups. First, you had the movement, for the survival of the sovereignty of the Ogoni people, MOSOP. Then you later had the Niger Delta Vigilante Group, the Niger Delta Force. You had the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta. Now, all of these were militant groups that sprang up, in the Niger Delta, of course, to challenge the Nigerian state about the fact that people in the Niger Delta had been marginalized, and there was visible and naked expression of horizontal inequality. That the resources that were derived from those places, creeks of the Niger Delta, have been used to develop other parts of the country, but the Niger Delta. And of course, for those of us who had some experiences in the Niger Delta, we would agree to the fact that if you went to the creek communities, you would wonder, let's say you just are a foreigner to this country, and you flew in from any part of the world and landed in Abuja, and you see the state of development in Abuja, roads, beautiful streets, all kinds of things. And then they blindfold you and then took you to one of the creeks in the Niger Delta. You were likely to conclude that this was not going to be part of Nigeria. And that's actually the visible expression of horizontal inequality. The fact that the Nigerian state was deriving its economy, or partly its economy, from that part of the country. And yet the people there were wallowing and living in abject poverty. That created dissonance. And then the resonance is that, look, we needed to redress these kinds of imbalance, injustice against that part of the country. And then groups started emerging, and all those groups that I listed, Asari Dokubo, Tom Ateke, Tompolo, all of those guys, and there are several, self-acclaimed generals that had formed militant groups in the Niger Delta, pursuing the cause. But again, if you did some research, you realize that most of those groups were groups that were used by politicians, between 1999 and to the time that Niger Delta militancy became heightened, and were later abandoned by politicians. And so these are young boys who felt aggrieved, so the theory of frustration aggression came in. Already these young people were armed, had access to small arms and light weapons, then started engaging in illegal oil bunkering, and you had all kinds of trade by barter, crude for arms and all kinds of things, until Umar Musa Yar'Adua, late president, came with the amnesty for that region, that to a large extent doused the tension. But again, the fact that we had an amnesty didn't guarantee, because what you are experiencing on a daily basis is the fact that, yes, crude oil has become the mainstay for the Nigerian economy. But what is being siphoned today, from the whispers that you hear, is maybe 6-7 times more than what the Nigerian state is even declaring. I'm talking about illegal bunkering that has become very sophisticated, and it's involving all kinds of groups from across this country and the international space. Today, that natural resource that was supposed to be used to develop even communities from that part of the region are just ending on people's pockets. And so including those from the Niger Delta now are involved in those nefarious activities. And so what do? We take the proceeds from those kinds of illegal, derivations, and then go somewhere else, some parts of the country, and we buy beautiful houses, and then we build universities, and then we do all kinds of things and engage in international trade. That is the reality that's taking place in the Niger Delta today. So now the paradox of which is, take the militant leaders, for example, one after the other, who have come out forcefully to defend the cause of their people in the Niger Delta. There is what? A segregation between the class of those who have now and those who don't have. The militants have become excessively rich and yet are still unable to develop even their own communities. That is a paradox for me, So that's the thing about militancy. Now we move to the issue of insurgency. Insurgency here, and I want to, make some conceptual, clarification of terms. I see a synonymous, interchangeable, usage of insurgency and terrorism and whatever. Now, so if by insurgency, for example, we want to classify groups, groups like Boko Haram and whatever, I would say no, they don't fall into the category of insurgency, of insurgents again. No. Maybe by the time Boko Haram started and it declared a caliphate of its own and it wanted a government of its own, that could have been an insurgent group at that inception. But as it is now, Boko Haram and those other splinter groups, whether it's Ansaru, ISWAP, and whatever, ISIS, they've all been designated as terrorist groups. So they were not dealing with insurgent groups again. Insurgent groups are more or less groups that may want to form, a pseudo government for themselves, challenging the authority of a state. Here we are dealing with ideological movement, that has been designated as a terrorist group, or they have been designated as terrorist groups. Now, to create a distinction between what is happening in the Northeast, whether with Boko Haram, ISWAP, or Ansaru group, or whatever it is in that part of the region, with what is happening in the Southeast, the indigenous people of Biafra that had also been designated as a terrorist group. I would want to say, for example, what is happening in the Southeast is more of insurgency than terrorism. Although you could say crude means of terrorism can be used to express insurgent movements and vice versa. So you find a distinction between what is happening in the Southeast, with the indigenous people of Biafra, and then the groups that are operating in the Northeast, beginning with the Boko Haram, that's the Jazz. Jamatul al-Sunnah, led Awat is well jihadi, that is known as Boko Haram, and then Ansaru, and then, of course, ISWAP. So, but let me speak to at least the simplistic understanding of what maybe the topic is trying to convey, that is classifying these groups. Now, again, I want to say, I see politics again at the heart of it. For those of you who may not know, or who may not have read wide, some years back, I think in 2000 and 2001, Professor Albert and myself, did a research under the Federal and Ethnic Studies championed by my very good boss, Professor Osaga. And so I happened to be in Maiduguri. And that was when there was a serious crisis between two factions of the All People's Party, APP. One led by Ma'ala Kachalla and one led by SAS, Senator Ali Modu Sharif. And then that led to the closure of the two factional parties in the state. But something was very striking, and as part of the findings from that research. We realized that each of those factions had a group that they referred to as the ECOMOG. ECOMOG patterned alongside what Nigeria and other West African states did in Sierra Leone and Liberia. Now, the ECOMOG group in, for Malaka Challa and Senator Alimo Sharif were actually political talks. These were political talks. And if you know the history behind the politics of Borno State, Malaka Challa was actually a retired principal who was brought into politics by Alimo Sharif. And disagreement broke out when he became governor, and Alimo Sharif wanted to control the appointment of certain key positions, in the state, So he wanted to provide who would be Minister of Finance, Minister of Works, Minister of what, and then Malaka Challa. So that was actually what led to that agreement. And then, of course, side by side, the political tussle came in the issue of Sharia in northern Nigeria. And so Malaka Challa used to, Alimo Sharif used that as a bait to say, okay, if I am elected, if I took over to become governor of Borno State, I was going to implement Sharia. And that was actually what brought him close to the Mohammed Yusuf group, to receive a lot of support, from the grassroots of the followers of Mohammed Yusuf. And that was actually what led to the appointment of one of their members of Boko Haram as the commissioner for religious affairs until they fell apart again. So what am I trying to say? That both for militancy and both for Boko Haram, you could see the hand of politics in it, which is not usually analyzed, to this extent. We always want to conclude that it was a religious group, yes, driven by religious ideologies of reformism, the Sunni reformism. Yes, you could say the Mahdist reformists. Yes, because of its name, Jamatul al-Sunnah lid da'awat is well jihadi. Those who wanted to practice Islam as was done in the days of Prophet Muhammad, and wanted to resist all forms of innovations in Islam. And of course became a very prominent group. But let us please note that that group didn't start as a violent group. Let us be very fair. And even when the military, arrested Mohammed Yusuf and handed him over to the police, that was where the problem started. Now, a state that became a rogue state, I was the first person to have written on Boko Haram. Go and check anyway. And I decided I wasn't going to write again until everything, because I didn't want a one-sided thing. I came with the historical evolution, the philosophy behind Boko Haram, but the injustice of the Nigerian state against that group is what has not been documented. Because as at the time Mohammed Yusuf was killed, of course, the school, his base was leveled. The group went to court. It actually went to court. And the court gave a verdict that, one, the Nigerian state must go and rebuild the school, rebuild the mosque, and then pay compensation to the families, of the people that were unjustly killed, and then bring to book those who did that. That never happened, So you found a rogue state that decided to, impose itself, against the wheels of justice, against its own citizens. And so when the group decided to retreat and then relaunch, today we are having not even the relics. We're still grappling with the issues of insecurity as a result of, for me, what the state could have avoided. In other words, if the state had done what the court had said, if the state had rebuilt the school, had rebuilt the mosque, paid compensation, and brought to justice those who carried out extrajudicial killings, perhaps we would not have been experiencing what we're experiencing today. But we allowed it to fester and spread like a cancer without a cure. And we would continue. And for those of you who know, terrorism is not filtered within 1 decade. It's not filtered within 2 decades or 3 decades, because it has become an ideology that is passed from one generation to the other. So we are going to continue to experience this, maybe in the next 20, 30 years before we were able to get what we would have avoided if we did the right thing as a state. But we demonstrated the fact that Nigeria is a rogue state, an anarchical state, a state that is not governed by the rule of law. That exactly was what defined what you are experiencing today in the Northeast. Well, I'm not making a case for Boko Haram. Yes, of course. A group that has become and has been designated as a terrorist group and is carrying out terror against innocent people. should also not be exonerated and should not be, eulogized. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that if the state had the capacity to do what is right, within the precincts of the rule of law and justice, and refused to do that, then it would have itself to blame. In the Southeast, you have the IPOP. Now, the IPOP, of course, is a resurrection, more or less, of what you find of the Biafran struggle, 1967, but of course, in a more civil way. Again, of course, the state became threatened and then used coercion and would want to clamp down on the group. Again, not making a case for the group. There are several things that the group is doing that certainly should not be condoned by any state. But of course, again, are these issues surmountable? Can they be resolved by just mere diplomacy and policies? I believe it can be done. But what we then have today, there's a mutation from and a gravitation from just the quest for an acknowledgement of a sovereign state, referred to as the indigenous people of Biafra today. We are now, facing all forms of nefarious activities associated with that group. Whether you want to say they are the fallen angels, of course, the group. I was privileged to supervise a student who did his PhD on that, so I have some certain knowledge about what is happening today. Now, what is happening today in the South is like a terror group that is terrorizing its own people, because the Eastern Security Network, or what you can say, the unknown gunmen, that are actually known by people in the community, are now the ones terrorizing, between the fringes of the Anambra State and Imo State. I mean, I'm talking about Ihiala and way down to Olu. Then you move to Okigwe, to some parts of Imo State. Now, they have mutated from just agitation. And then we are beginning to find all kinds of things taking place now. People being exposed to all kinds of drugs, what is referred to as Mary. And then you have people that are killing people to harvest their organs in order to make money, as part of the IPOP movement today. And the people want to shy away from that, but that's the truth. Hundreds of people are being killed, and then their organs are being taken and being sold, to international markets, to ritualists, to all kinds of groups today. It's happening. But then, of course, the case of Imo State is very classic. Again, we would want to ask, is there politics there, the hand of politics in it? Maybe, maybe not. So there are people who are aggrieved that somebody who didn't win election was imposed on the state as the governor by the declaration of a Supreme Court judgment. Somebody who came a distant fifth or sixth or fourth, I don't know, eventually became the governor of the state. I mean, you can see, whatever that does not emerge through legitimate means would have to find illegitimate expressions. And so that's the kind of thing that is happening. Now, to the issue of banditry in the Northwest. Zamfara State became the epicenter of banditry, and it is still the epicenter of banditry. So you move from Zamfara State, then to Katsina State, then to partly aspects of Kaduna State, from Birnin-Gwari, and then Niger State, the whole, parts of Kebbi State, So we are dealing with Boko Haram, or rather, terrorism in Northeast, and then here there's a fallout, the expression of banditry in the Northwest. Now, there are several factors, contributing factors to the rise of banditry in Zamfara State. But at the heart of it, is actually the issue of what? Illegal mining. Illegal mining. And I'm sure some of you would have seen a post by, Senator Adams Shomele, where he was actually, challenging the Nigerian state against double standards. And he said, look, you formed all kinds of task force clamping down on young people in the Niger Delta, because of illegal oil bunkering. And then people are harvesting all kinds of mineral resources from the belt of Birnin-Gwari way down to Zamfara State. People are involved in illegal mining. And then for what we may know and may not know is the fact that even the terrorist group from the Northeast found themselves into the forest of Briningwari, the stretch, the stretch of forest between Briningwari and Zamfara State, embarking on illegal mining in order to support the terrorist activities. And then those spaces have also been taken over by traditional rulers, by people in government, and of course, for those of us who have been following, you can see accusing fingers. It is being said that certain people who had ruled that state have also created, what you can say, the gold, whatever of their own, that if you go to Dubai and Qatar today, certain names are coming associated with gold coming from Zamfara State. So you had illegal mining where the elite in that part of the country, conniving with traditional rulers and politicians, bringing in Chinese people to illegally mine mineral resources, hard mineral resources. I'm talking about gold, diamond, and in fact, some have also talked about uranium. These spaces have been designated, have been shared amongst politicians today. So these are people who are now buying arms and giving to young people. Today, the young people have now realized that no, we can do it by ourselves. And so, apart from the issue of ethnicization of groups in Zamfara State, the issue of being Hausa different from the issue of being Fulani, as a result of cattle rustling. So today, we are expending huge resources. The Nigerian state, perhaps from 2010 and now, if you go and take the budget statistics of what this country have been budgeting in order to just fight insecurity, these are huge things that would have, through early warning systems and early warning signs, prevented and would have deployed these resources to building the kinds of best schools that Freedom Mono had talked about, providing the best hospitals that we know, providing best infrastructure that we're talking about. But here we are. Nigerians are involved in illegal mining across the northern belts, and nobody is saying anything. The Nigerian state is also afraid to publish the list of those, that are terror sponsors. It's also afraid of bringing on board the list of those that are involved in illegal mining, as Adam Soshomole said, because this list are there on the tables of those in government, and yet we are now using the Commonwealth, not only to support illegal activities, but expending huge, ditto the human loss that is associated with these activities. Have you ever taken statistics of the number of military persons that we have lost to banditry and insurgency or terrorism and militancy in this country? It's so huge. So huge. And so their wives and children are now becoming impoverished, and then the solutions are not provided simply because of the issue of greed and grievance that the state has refused to. So, in a nutshell, we'll be asking, is Nigeria actually a failed state? Or is it a failing state? Because if you take statistics, those of us who did some little research into small arms and light weapons, the number of small arms and light weapons that are circulating in this country are 10 times over, or maybe 50 times over, what our Nigerian security agencies are holding today. So how do you expect a state like that to be secured and not to be fragile? As a matter of fact, Nigeria is like a sinking ship, a ship heading toward catastrophe. And it looks like the political elite in this country does not even seem to care or does not have the commitment to cast an anchor to stop that ship from heading toward catastrophe. And so what we are seeing right now, for me, is actually a tip of the iceberg. Because what is going to come thereafter, oh no, I don't think any of us will, in terms of magnifying the unimaginable, I think those will only be left for the dreams, for our dreams to imagine. And because it just seemed that the state has become so incapacitated. And is it really the case that the Nigerian state lacks the capacity to stem the tide of banditry, insurgency, and militancy in this country? I don't think so. What you are finding is the expression of a state that is morally bankrupt, a state that's been hijacked by criminal elements, And if you read the book by Bayat, the criminalization of the state is what is taking place. Bayat had long, in 1996, predicted that West African states especially would be taken over by criminal elements. And in the running of the states, of course, there will not be justice, there will not be equity, there will not be freedom, there will not be respect for rights and the rule of law. What exactly are we seeing in Nigerian state other than that prophetic message that Francois Bayat gave? So, because the conspiracy by the elite that has criminally taken over the state and has found its fingers in all of these nefarious activities, whether you say it's banditry, whether you say it's all political economy of the game. And who would wrestle the Nigerian state from the criminal actors? It doesn't seem that there's an answer to that, So I wouldn't want to bore us so much, but I want to stop here, and wait for questions and answers or some clarification if people want. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Prof, we are having about 5 minutes to go.
Yeah, I'm
so
done.
Please,
I'm done.
Okay, fine. So we have 3 people this time around for questioning. Three.
Yeah, I'm listening.
3.
Can I?
I'm listening.
Okay. Prof, good afternoon.
Thank you,
Good
sir.
afternoon, ACG. Longest time. Prof, my question is
Very
this.
good afternoon, sir. Yes.
In the educational system or conventional school, like you are teaching us now, all your lectures are very sweet, touching the mind. But you begin to see sometimes the question, National Assembly has not done this, executive have not done this, the people in question have not done this. Nobody wants to accept blame. If you go to National Assembly now, they tell you it is not them. You go to executive, the executive will tell you it is not them. Yeah, and you come to the academic field, the academicians will tell you, no, the problem is not from them. Sometimes I'll begin to ask in Nigeria, who is truly the problem? You go to court, even where you want to get justice. They know they are not giving justice, but they will tell you they are not the people that caused the problem, that their hands are tied. Please, who is tying all this hand that is making things not to work? If you can help us, I beg. Who is tying and who is giving us the rope? I beg. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Question number 2.
If I can take a shot, this is Dr. Kabir.
Okay. Abdullah Kabir.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. You took us through around Nigeria and, of course, delved into the various challenges. So looking at, this morning we had a speech from our president, and he was very clear in admitting or acknowledging that progress is being made. But for those of us, and like you've indicated, I do watch closely the State Fragility Index. And Nigeria has consistently, over the last few years, maintained a position of between 13th or 14th out of the about 100 countries that in that index, which means that we, like you rightly indicated, we're at the brink, God forbid, of collapse. Our politicians don't seem to acknowledge this. They don't seem to admit this. In addition, I read consistently the report by the African Polling Institute, which yearly produce our social cohesion index. And they consistently indicate how bad we're faring in terms of social cohesion. Now, all of these are indices of a collapsing state, plus what you've mentioned with regards to the insecurity challenges across Nigeria. There are two things, and this is my question. Security sector reform and security sector governance. Where are we? Why is both the academic as well as politicians not paying attention to these very critical indices that would form a solid and resilient national security enterprise? We have a situation where we have a government 2 years into its tenure has only held one National Security Council meeting, if I'm right. And several other challenges that speak to security sector governance, security sector reform. We have a police after NSAS that promised us reform that, in summary, has been cyclical. So why are we not speaking about these two very important issues, especially in this Fourth Republic that hold promise, but unfortunately that promise continues to remain a promise. Almost everybody that has spoken from the beginning of this webinar to now speaks about that promise, yet that call for action that will move us to the promised land. So I would really love if you can speak to these two things. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. I'm told that there are 3 questions.
Prof, you can continue from there. Just answer those 2 questions.
Okay. Now, nobody is tying anybody's hand. Let me just know the gentleman that asked the first question. The issue is that there are responsibilities assigned. Now, when people elect people to positions of leadership, those leaders are supposed to be responsible to the duties that they are elected. So we have a country with the executive, with the legislature, with the judiciary. Of course, we are not trying to create a pyramid of hierarchy, but of course, everything falls down on the table of Mr. President and his cabinet. Mr. President, so people should take responsibility for, if you are a father in the house and then there is no food at home, no water at home, nothing, then you begin to say, no, the mother said, the children said. I mean, there's a problem somewhere. It means that nobody is governing that home, So if the National Assembly is beginning to say we are not part of it, the executive exonerating is trying to absorb itself, and the judiciary is saying its hands are, nobody is tying anybody's hands. People must learn to take responsibility. Why do they seek for elections? Whether they come through the legitimate or illegitimate means, they are occupying the position, and then they must demonstrate the capacity to lead a state. Leading a state sometimes is not about morality. No, actually not. It's not about morality. It's doing what is right for the state. That is the most important thing. We didn't elect people to come and begin to tell us that, no, we won't, it is not our responsibility. It is. But the people in the National Assembly were elected as much as the president and his vice president are also elected. The judiciary is supposed to be a neutral party. But of course, there is a penetration of and the weakening of some of those institutions today. What we're beginning to say is that the civil society group were more vibrant during the military than they are today. What is happening? It means that somehow there is a corruption of the system that had penetrated all the sectors of the society today. So because we don't want to be responsible to certain things, we begin to absolve ourselves of those responsibilities. That's wickedness to a state. The citizens went out to elect. People must perform their duties and take responsibility for failure, if there is any failure, and make amends where necessary. That's number one. Now, Dr. Kabir, the issue of security, security sector reform and governance is another huge issue, actually. And I'm always guided by the stand of the Japanese government. When the whole debate about human security started, the earlier scholars saw it like a shift, from the state-centric to the human person. And say, no, it's a shift from state-centric security to human-centered security. No. No, I took the stand that was taken by the Japanese government, on these issues. This Japanese government came out clearly to say, no, you need a strong state as much as you need the strong citizens of the state. There has to be a balance between the state and the citizens, and I think that should define the whole concept of new security architecture, whether it's traditional or human security, encompassing. Now, I'm bringing that in order to respond to the issue of the security sector reform. You see, there is this conspiracy even in international politics and policies. Now, when they started this idea of security sector reform, it was actually to say, okay, even in your budget, you cut down on your budget, for defense so that at least you can, channel resources toward education and health and whatever. No, the truth is that defense would require a good budget as education and health will do. That's the thing about security sector reform. Now, whereas they were asking African states, to spend less on issues of defense, they were actually committing greater resources. Pentagon, for example, in order to service Pentagon, for every 1 hour that Pentagon is serviced, is more than the entire African states budget just to service Pentagon and to do new research into weapons and weaponry. We are not doing that. What we refuse to do, and I'm happy you brought out the issue of the NSAS thing, is that we had been tinkering, from Mike Okiro's time to protect the police. Should the police be a force or should it be a service? It's still a debate that the Nigerian state had not been able to clearly define itself. All over the world over, the police in other climes, I was in the UK when the police went on strike, because the police is not a force, it's a service. It's a service. And when you begin to to describe your police as a force because of those colonial edicts that we have refused to, transform since independence till this very moment, we have not been able to define a police as a service to its own people. And then we begin to look at it as a force. It will continue. So what you have is actually, new wine, or rather old wine in new skin. That's exactly what we're dealing with. In the case of the police that you mentioned, it's actually old wine in new skin. So forget about any regalia that they want to sow and give to the police. The philosophy, everything that is guiding the police is what it used to be from colonialism through military to this very moment. And that is because successively, governments, different regimes and era in Nigeria have seen the police as an instrumental tool to continue to be used, just like colonialism used it against the Nigerians. That is how successive governments are using the police against Nigerians and against their political opponents. And that is why they wouldn't want to change the course for the police to take an effective reform that will make it a civil group that will protect the interests of the state. And because what we're having all through, I'm happy this conversation is coming, is that successively, we are only dealing with issues of regime security instead of national security. We're only interested in regime security instead of national security. And that is why, because of regime security, you see where the presidency is located. Right in front of it is the DSS. Behind it are all military barracks from Mambila way to Mogadishu, cantonment, Abacha barracks. Because what is most important is for us to deploy the collective security of the state to just protecting the security of the presidency. That's all. And so we will not be able to come up with a good security sector reform as long as people think that the security sector itself should serve the interest of a serving regime. And it will continue to, to manifest in that way. So until we're able to come out with a clear architecture, a blueprint, where we would say the security of the state is the security of everybody, and not just the security of the president or those around him, did it strike you, sir? Those of you who are very close to Abuja, anytime that the president decides to move from, that presidency in front of Aso Rock way to the airport, we're talking about 50 kilometers, at every 100 meters, you see the deployment, a consignment of police, mobile police, the army, and whatever, you know what I mean? Every 100 meters until you get to the airport. Does that tell you that this is a state that is securing its own people? No, it's about regional security. And so there's even we have not even started defining what security sector reform is all about. Because what security sector means is to reform the security in order to strengthen the regimes that are in power. That is exactly what we are having today, and nothing of any such in order to protect the interests of the nation. You would move from most parts of northern Nigeria.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
Yes.
Professor Najibo, thank you very much for coming up with such kind of interjection and solution to a relevant issue of the day. But we must cut it short now so that I can go and x-ray what we have detailed so that other people can catch up, please.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much. You are welcome, Prof. Yes, Professor Najibo spoke on security, and he started by talking on Nigerian political landscape as a paradox, starting with statement from late Metamasule, is broadcast on BBC Hausa, the prospect of the nation, X-ray of pre-independence Nigeria, the 1957 to 66 founding fathers' investment on the nation, so much to ensure that we had an independence, and also the development plan that was introduced, which led to organizations or companies like Ajaokuta, Jebadam coming up, which has been neglected. In 1966, Metamasule was a minister of power, steel, and petroleum. Yet, when there was the first coup in 1966, he couldn't even transport his family down with an aircraft or a vehicle, but rather he used a train. And even to his family house. Samodu Bello, up to today, his house was a mud house in Sokoto. These are the founding fathers who are committed to making a nation. But today, it's a paradox. We also have the example of India, China, Brazil. They were assessed behind Nigeria prior to 1960, but today they are ahead of us. And also he brought the example of University of Ibadan that wanted to be the best public university in sub-Saharan Africa as of 1958. It was rated as the best university in the Commonwealth. But where is University of Ibadan rated today? He also spoke about Niger Delta marginalization with respect to resources extracted from the region to develop other parts of the country. It was also part of the problem that led to the militancy and agitation in the Niger Delta. Then he also x-rayed the issue of beautiful roads and streets, edifices in Abuja, where you compare with the creek, where the money is being gotten from. Back to 1999 political climate that brought about the armed thugs who were abandoned and later became militants and agitators in the creek. The amnesty program of late President Umar Yar'Adua as an interventionist approach to help in curbing militancy. Then the militant leaders, segregation between the haves and the have-not. Some of the militants are extremely rich today, while others are poor, giving room to more agitation. Then the issue of insurgency, the era of declaration of caliphate that led to the insurgents in the Northeast, and now they have metamorphosed into having links with other terrorist groups like ISWAP and others, and also designated terrorist groups by international community. This has brought us to a different sphere from insurgency to terrorism. And then we also have the issue of the Southeast, the ESN and the IPOP, also coming up from the issue of agitation, now becoming a body of terrorists. The political undertone. The professor has taken a lot of assignment, particularly in the area of research and ethnic study. He gave us the example of their visit to Maiduguri, where they studied the political faction in Maiduguri between Ali Modu Sharif and Mala Kachala, and the succession story. that led to the issue of Mohammed Yusuf and others coming up. And then because justice was not done, we have what we have today. Historical evolution and the philosophy behind BH is relevant for study by our Intelligence and Security Committee. And bringing this to fore, we must go back to the historical evolution and philosophy behind the Boko Haram. It will be very, very important for our Intelligence and Security Community. Then the avoidable gaps and circumstances that led to the present security challenges came as a result of the state taking a wrong step to addressing a provocative stance. State refusing to do the needful within the rule of law. And then we have the political undertone of those who did not win an election and fighting back because they won't concede. That we can see all through our political cycle. Then Prof also delved on Zamfara, Katsina, Kaduna, and Kebbi State and Niger State, where we have the bandits taking over in the northwest. Zamfara State is noted presently for illegal mining, while those in southeast are clamped upon for bunkering. The stretch of land between Benugwari and Zamfara State need to be taken over by our security forces to be able to stop the exploitation by the elites, conniving with traditional rulers and political class to mine illegally gold. Arms were given to young people, and now they have decided to take the law into their hands. 2010 up to now, the Prof spoke about budget to fight insecurity could have been deployed to building best schools and hospitals if these security issues have been addressed. But here we are today, budgeting to fight insecurity. Then moral bankruptcy as a moral decadence for the state, where there is no justice, equity, or rule of law. Conspiracy by the elite leads to the issues of insurgency and banditry and terrorism. Issue of shared responsibility. We believe in pushing blames at others or pointing accusing fingers instead of accepting responsibility. We must move away from promissory to covenanting with the political class. So the citizens must move from issue of promissory to covenanting with the political class on what they are going to deliver, and they should hold them responsible for what they have delivered and what they have not delivered. Why do people seek for election? It is to serve. But rather in this case, people serve themselves by filling their pockets and then buying expensive houses, sending their children abroad while the children of commoners remain here hunger. And that's why we have all the problems we have on the streets. State-centric to human-centered security. The Japanese government, the Prof used as an example, we need to move towards a strong state as well as having strong citizens. And there is also this conspiracy theory in international politics, where budget is being directed at defense rather than being directed at others. But Prof also gave a soft landing that budget can be given to each and every agency based on the need. So there must be need assessment before we budget, not just budgeting for the purpose of budgeting. What gave a better perspective about security and intelligence is not about budget, but about the security cycle, the security and intelligence community being strengthened. So there must be a strong institution rather than a strong legislation. Sometimes strong legislation does not have place when the institutions are weak. So the institution must be strong enough to be able to make the law to legislation strong enough. So we need both a strong legislation and a strong institution. And by so doing, we'll have strong citizens in a strong nation. Thank you very much. Dr. Kade, the next speaker, please.
Very much, ACG and our resource persons. It's really a delight that some of these issues are coming out around this time. Before I give my concluding remarks, I'd like to also inform you that some of our board members are participating in the program, and I want them to just make some few remarks before I thank all our panelists and conclude the program. We have the former national coordinator of the National Counterterrorism Center, retired Rear Admiral Y.M. Musa. Maybe you can make some remarks, sir. Admiral, sir.
No, please unmute me. Unmute.
Okay, but you can unmute yourself. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I want to invite retired Rear Admiral Musa to comment before I make my concluding remarks. Admiral, sir, can you hear me?
He cannot mute himself. Maybe he's having issue. Help him to unmute if it is possible.
Okay. Let me try that. Okay, I'll just leave that for my colleagues to work on so I don't keep everybody waiting. I want to thank Professor Ken Ife, one of our renowned financial experts in Nigeria, for finding time to... Hello, Admiral, I'm struggling to unmute you. Can you unmute yourself?
I cannot. That's why they... Okay, but I'm hearing you.
I don't know if they... Yes, they will work on it.
But we can hear him now. Let him go on and begin to speak now.
Oh, you can hear him. Okay, let me ask him. Let him call me and then he can talk from there. Because he just called me, and so maybe that works. I think that's what we would have done for Professor Nwolise also. Admiral, they can hear you. They can hear you, so just keep talking.
Okay, but why did that? Please try with technical thing.
Yes, they are listening.
Okay, sorry about the delay. I'm delighted to be part of today's program. I want to wish everyone happy Independence anniversary. I would like to speak to the topic of security and fragility as how that relates to youth unemployment. I hope I'm clear on the platform.
Yes, they are listening to you.
Is it clear enough? It's okay. The subject, security and fragility, as put by this program, goes to the very heart of our nation's struggle for stability. Post-independent, Nigeria has struggled with structural weaknesses in governance, identity politics, and even development. This difficulty created fragile ground for frustration and great conflict, which later led to unorganized violence in various forms such as insurgency, militancy, and Niger Delta crisis, security agitation, and in recent time, terrorism and banditry. It's obvious that the drivers of these complex situations are not only about bombs and weapons, but underlying causes such as poverty, unemployment, corruption, further corruption, weak justice system, and the weaponization of our religion and ethnicity that also bring us together. So the paradox of insecurity in Nigeria since independence, to my own opinion, lies in the state's persistent inability to provide adequate safety and stability for its citizens, despite having a massive security apparatus and a large annual defense budget. When the state is unable to envisage, the state is unable, as envisaged by the citizens, to provide adequate security, education, health, or livelihood, citizens are forced to provide their own security. And in this context, non-state actors tend to fill the gap, try to offer protection or first steps of belongingness. This deepening security is rooted in our complex interplay of historical legacy as mentioned by various speakers. Political instability and socio-economic challenges. Therefore, there is the need for us to understand this history and experiences and reality to be able to provide sustainable solutions to all the challenges that we have envisaged in whatever dimension, whether it is security, economy, or what have you. So the security is beyond the responsibility. As a nation, we are not destined to be fragile. I must confess. Nigeria's response to this multi-dimensional security must be comprehensive. And let me make myself clear, insecurity is not only about being secure and security. I'm talking of security in various dimensions: economic, political, and social belongingness. So a purely kinetic approach, which is the use of the government security forces, I consider this insufficient. The suggestion feeds on injustice. And militancy thrives where development is absent. We must therefore pursue a role of society's strategy, strengthening governance, restoring trust between state and citizens, and empowering youth, addressing inequality, as well as ensuring justice is not selective. On education, we need to take advantage of the paradox. The paradox of a large, educated youth population facing widespread unemployment and insecurity in Nigeria have persisted since our independence. So instead of becoming an ending approach, this democratic dividend has fueled social unrest, crime, and instability. So to turn this youthful population into an economic asset, Nigeria must address the education to employment paradox through what one of the speakers said, which is very apt. That's why I asked my question earlier. Where the certification, there is not coincide with the available job. So through a multi-pronged strategy focused on systemic and cultural change, this is what we need. Instead of merely producing certificate holders, the education systems will be reoriented to cultivate skills and a entrepreneurial mindset that foster creation. We must realize that there is a nexus between the level of education in the country among the youth that are youth of and the insecurity in the environment. let us stick to the fact that illiteracy is the cause of our insecurity. Most of our insecurity today, from what we see from those that have been brought out from the enclaves, they are mostly educated. Across the country, the insecurity in some part of the countries are not catalyzed by illiteracy. So we must address the youth board to be able to address the insecurity in the country. I thank you so much.
Thank you, Admiral. Okay, this distinguished panelists and participants, I'm just wondering, because there are two of our resource persons that are struggling to join us through the Zoom link. We have Professor Obisi Nwolise and Professor Ope. I've just spoken with Professor Nwolise now. I'm thinking this system that, this method that Admiral Musa used, we can also use that for him to speak to us for about 5-10 minutes. We can learn a lot from the wisdom of the retired professor of political science. And perhaps we can also do that for Professor Ope to be able to historicize some of our challenges, and then we ask the questions together. Is that okay? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I need someone to
We can hear you,
respond so I can
Ogakayode.
move on.
Yeah, we can hear you, Ogakayode. We can hear
Okay.
you.
Okay. So should I just call Professor Nwolise, let him give us some 5 minutes talk around his topic, and also Professor Ope. I'll do that in just a minute. Thank you. So you can join the call me back on WhatsApp. Call me back on WhatsApp. Call me back on WhatsApp. Okay. All right, Prof. Prof.
Yes,
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay, you have the floor, sir.
I can hear you. Yes.
You have
I
the
can
floor,
hear
sir.
you.
You have the floor, sir.
Yeah, it's all right. Thank you.
But we just have about 5 minutes. Yes.
Category of people I'm talking to. Okay, let us. I'm assuming that the category of the plan that are living in not control
what the question, why the Nigerian dilemma? Nigeria had a dilemma over federalism because our leaders as a federation since the independence by other components. These three are being violated in Nigeria. Policing. In a the
Okay. Hello. I think I've spoken with Professor Nwolise. That time may not work. His network is still bad, so we will just leave it for another time. Please let me thank all our panelists, Professor Freedom Onoa, Professor Dan Jibo, and the retired Assistant Controller General of Immigration for helping to coordinate this program. We want to thank our esteemed distinguished participants, and I can mention all of you because I know you by name, but they are all from different spheres of influence. We have those from the security sphere, those from the media sphere, those from the business and economic sphere. We have those from the academics, civil society organizations. I see all of you. I think this is something we need to do more often. It's also to inform you that all this conversation was live on YouTube, so that more people can view us from different parts of the world. And what we're going to do with some of the information we've received is to, cascade and dovetail some of these ideas to people at different parts of the country. So we continue to engage until we have a better Nigeria. From us, all of us, I want to thank my colleagues at the Peace Building Development Consult for the efforts you've put together to, it's supposed to be a public holiday, but we are working. And I know this is part of our commitment to Nigeria. So I'm wishing you a very happy Independence celebration and a good holiday. Thank you, and bye from all of us.
Thank you so much.
Hello, can you all hear me? Okay,
thank you so
sir.
much. Happy Independence. Goodbye.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you very much. God bless you.